Okay, so we still have some folks coming in, but I think we're going to get started. Thank you so very much for being here. I'm Gail Fugan. I'm the CEO and president of the Advertising Research Foundation. Roll up your sleeves, sit back, relax, take off your jackets. We're going to have a dynamic, you know, it's an R-rated for research, shut the drapes and like get the steam coming out of your ears. We're going to really shake up this topic and these topics that we weren't even talking about these topics like 3 to 5 years ago, except what I happen to know is that a number of the people that we've been able to invite into this conversation have been working on these topics for years. And so you have the distinct privilege of being able to be with the best, brightest, and smartest people in the areas of ad blocking and ad fraud in the industry that also is just a real close cousin of cybersecurity. So I'm just delighted to have you here. What we really like to do is have a dynamic conversation, not a one-way conversation, and have everybody be able to figure out by the time you leave today, what do you want to do about this, and what do you want to take back to the C-suite and to the people that you work with every day with a kind of a recipe for next steps. We've titled this "Taming the Elephant in the Room," and I kind of love that because I actually don't think you tame elephants. And so it's intentionally provocative in terms of, I don't know that we're going to eliminate ad blocking and ad fraud. We need to understand it. We need to understand why it's happening. We need to maybe think about how we could be preventing it. I have this like little idea that perhaps copy testing would be really interesting if you gave consumers the chance to say whether they would block this ad or not when you're coming up with creative. So when I worked at General Mills, we were trying to figure out how do you find out if consumers actually really are compelled by this creative? What if you put that big red hand up and said, how do you feel about this commercial? Would you block this one? Or the little X for the banner ad? So that's the kind of thinking. We want to have this big kind of integrated discussion all the way along the insights process and insights in advertising. I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about who we are at the ARF and what we want to provide for you, and some background about some of the most original and important research that we've been doing lately. I want to introduce Mark Rappin, who's our head of strategic sponsorship, and I want to introduce Kelly Flynn, two ARF folks that are here with me, who's the director of new business, and then I also want to introduce Jeff Buchan is a board member and is just now stepping down, but from Google is our young pro board member and highly, highly active at the ARF, and George Turhanian as a board member and on the executive committee, and soon to be, if the proxies come in appropriately, our finance chair, of the finance committee. So during the break, meet them, and they'll be happy to welcome you, I'm sure, as well. So now it's my distinct pleasure to introduce Conrad Feldman. If you go on our website, you can see me interviewing Conrad in Cannes with like the beautiful water behind us. We were wearing. Yeah, right. We were wearing sunglasses. Conrad had a hat on. And but anyway, we had a really terrific conversation. And the first question that I asked him in my interview is, talk about your background, because your background actually is in cybersecurity. And so Conrad has an amazing background, of course, CEO and a co-founder of Quantcast all the way back from 2006. And thank you so much for hosting us here today. It's such an appropriate venue for us. But prior to that, he co-funded SearchSpace, which is now Fortent, which is has been the leading provider of terrorist financing detection and anti-money laundering software, which is why I asked him about his fascinating background. And you'll find that about a number of people that are here today. And then as CEO, you actually established that business in the United States as a dynamic leader. He said we could have an event here, but he said we're actually like coming out of the seams because you've grown so fast at Quantcast. So obviously this is a very, very successful business. Is educated in London at the University College in London. And then it has a bachelor's in computer science from the University College at London as well. So please join me. Warm round of applause welcoming Conrad.
Thank you. And welcome to Quantcast. We're delighted to host this event. Obviously, it's a very important topic, and issues that are really affecting our industry. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation. Obviously, there've been tons of talk about these topics in recent months. Clearly, it's a really significant problem, and we spend a lot of time thinking about ways of tackling the symptoms. And I think we've got to also spend time thinking about how we tackle the cause. Why do these issues exist? And I think we've got to take it all the way right to where the money comes from. Our industry is an enormous industry, something close to $600 billion a year. So all the money that goes into the industry, all the money that different companies and parts of the ecosystem are participating in and chasing, and all the money that the fraudsters are going after comes from the money that advertisers are spending. And a significant part of the problem occurs because of the misalignment of incentives. And if we get better at measuring real outcomes, all of the proxies, all the measurement we use underneath will be aligned with that. It's much more difficult to defraud things. And when you're defrauding something, you're creating a false outcome. If we measure real outcomes and we associate the metrics earlier on in the advertising ecosystem with those outcomes, it's harder to perpetrate fraud. Today, certainly, AI is improving all the time, but right now, robots don't buy products. And so if we were measuring incrementality, bots would disappear. We have similar issues with viewability. Non-viewable ads cannot influence consumers. So whilst we continue to do great work in identifying problems and dealing with issues as they come up, I feel that we as an industry have an obligation to look at the reasons that these issues occur and think about ways that we can organize the industry to align around the interests of the participants and where the money comes from and how it's spent. And I think that will go a great way to creating an environment where we don't have to deal with as many issues, where we're not having to constantly try and sort of whack-a-mole. But really looking forward to the conversation today, and hopefully able to participate a little bit as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Conrad. Now I figured out how to get on camera. I'm just that. So I'm not sure where to clicker to advance the slides, maybe. So our number one request by consumers today is to meet me on my own terms. If you think of how you consume media yourself today, it's across any number of screens, and it's really 24/7, which is really different than the traditional appointment television from some years ago or other traditional media consumption models. I'm going to let you advance. And we know that media is being redefined, and the way that media is being redefined is okay. Well, I can actually do it without slides. We know media is being redefined, and the way that we know media is being redefined is the fact that in the old days, you could see television on a screen, if you're kind of my generation, on one screen in the living room, in a mahogany box or a metal box. My dad said we had a black and white 12-inch screen TV, and he said, if this breaks, we're not getting another one, right? Today, what we know is that consumers can consume media in 25 different screens, 2 of which are illegal. What we know from the ARF, from the original research that we've conducted, is that more platforms are better. And being able to reach the consumer across multiple platforms is better than just reaching the consumer on any one platform, whether it's traditional television, print, radio, or it's new media, social, mobile, all the different forms of reaching consumers in new media. And so what we actually see is that you get greater ROI, up to 35% greater ROI. If you run across as many as 5 platforms, you need to be adding a platform. What we also know is that the best combination of platforms is traditional media plus new media. And in fact, if you combine digital plus television, you can actually get a 60% increase in ROI. We know this from this ground truth research we did. It was $375 billion in advertising. It was done across 5,000 campaigns, 15 years of data. These are definitive ground truths, and this is it's groundbreaking research. What I like about it for the C-suite is that it's deceptively simple, but it's definitively proven. We call that the kicker effect. what we've done is we've rolled that up and said if everyone added one more platform, what kind of economics would that create? And what it creates is $31 billion in incremental ROI that could be reinvested in advertising across these platforms instead of discounting brands. And I think that's the evergreen desire of any brand building company, any marketing companies, to be able to invest in brands instead of discounting brands. Got it. All right. And further, what we know is that marketers are now concerned about things that they never even heard of before, right? They're concerned about ad blocking. They're really concerned about ad fraud. They're concerned about whether they're getting what they're paying for. There are more issues and complexities that are coming up that are really blocking marketers like simple, if you could give them a simple roadmap as to how to spend and invest their money, they really need to be able to get some solutions. You take a look at ad blocking, there's a generation of folks that are actually blocking ads more than other generations is somewhat concerning because it tends to be millennials. And there is a slide that has a picture, which is a hello, my name is Gail, of my son, who is smack dab in the middle of millennials. These are college graduates. It's a picture of him in his graduation outfit. They tend to be male. They tend to be between 28 and 35 years old. So it's a narrower band of millennials than 18 to 34. And it is a huge generation. In fact, someone recently said to me that this year, for the very first time, the number of people turning 35 is going to be greater than the birth rate. So this is a big, if you think about just the economics of the number of people that are going into being in that ad blocking kind of generation, this is a big issue, and that's why we're referring to it as the elephant in the room. Whether we're going to be able to tame it or not, we're going to try to figure that out. The C-suite is still asking, are my marketing dollars driving growth in sales, and how can I spend my next dollar? And that's what we've been able to answer at the ARF. The way we do that, though, is we don't do it, you all do it. So in this past year, we've had 500, it's about a year and a half, we've had 521 papers submitted. So many of you have presented papers. That's what the event today is going to be about. We've held 99 different events. We have held leadership labs. Our leadership labs have had as many as 900 different people attending. They're also being webcast. We're webcasting our events so that you don't have to necessarily come to a location like this, but you can have access to this material. And we've created 59 different stages, as well as creating a number of different events, because we want to create opportunities for you to exchange ideas with each other. So we'd like to invite you on November 14th and 15th. The next time we're going to be out here for a big event. We're going to be at Facebook's offices out in Silicon Valley for our November event. It's going to be November 14th and 15th. And Eric Zunzik, who I also was able to interview in Cannes, is going to be one of our keynote speakers. He's the Chief Strategy Officer at CB Crispin Porter. Really a very bright thinker and someone that you would definitely not want to miss. And I want to thank today's speakers who are all sitting, you're rubbing elbows with them. And without further ado, I want to give Augustine the chance to play with the slides and give Mark some direction. And hopefully you memorized your slides. You can kind of work your way through it. But Dr. Augustine Fu, it's really an honor to have you here today. And he's actually curated much of the programming here, along with Chris Bacon, who is hopefully watching the webcast. And so many thanks to Chris Bacon for all the hard work that he put into this. Dr. Fu spent much of his career at Omnicom, leading the healthcare consultancy group, which is a $100 million agency group serving medical device and healthcare clients. He has over 20 years of management consulting experience. He started out at McKinsey. Before that, he actually received his PhD at MIT at the ripe old age of 23. I was able to find out from John, who did some research on him, that he has a jet-propelled grill patent. I think that he probably applied for some other patents, but that's the one that he got. So if you want to hear about grilling, see Augustine during the break. And please join me in welcoming Dr. Augustine Fu.
Thank you. I'm glad I don't have any slides, so I'll just talk for a few minutes. Welcome, everyone. I have the privilege of helping to kick off this afternoon and providing a little bit of context. So today we're going to talk about ad fraud, ad blocking, viewability, and how all of those are interrelated. So, at first glance, we've been talking about these issues for many years now, right? So viewability has been something the industry's worked on for many years. And bots and fraud people have been aware of. And more recently, ad blocking has kind of come out of nowhere and it's very mainstream now. But all these things actually weave together. They're all interrelated. And let me use a very simple example to illustrate. So from our research, we can see that humans use ad blocking, but the bots don't, because the bots are actually there to cause the ad impressions to load, right? So if humans use ad blocking and ad fraud bots don't, then if you actually see a low rate of ad blocking, it could be because it's low ad blocking, or it could also be because you have a lot of bots. So if you just measure ad blocking in isolation of those other things, you're going to have an incomplete picture. So you have to measure those two things together. And let me use one more example. Viewability is also kind of commingled in there as well, because for many years as an industry, we've been setting viewability standards, and now it's been set and it's propagating nicely. However, that assumes that the publishers play by the rules, right? So good publishers play by the rules. The bad guys don't play by the rules, right? So basically, they can stack all their ads above the fold and make them all 100% viewable. So that leads to another problem, right? So these things are now commingled. And what that leads to is another problem, which is the problem of measurement. So when you have fraud activities like fraudulent traffic, fraudulent impressions, and fraudulent clicks, the analytics platforms that you use faithfully record everything. So now if you have fraudulent traffic, impressions, and clicks, those are now messing up the very analytics, the very measurement tools that you're using to optimize your campaigns. So if you imagine if the bad guys have higher viewability sites and you're optimizing for, okay, I want my, it's kind of obvious, right? You want your ads to be shown on higher viewability sites. If you're just optimizing for that, you could actually end up sending more dollars to the bad guys, right? And that's not a good thing. So, not only are those three topics interrelated, but we also have to be very vigilant about it because it's going to mess up the analytics and it's going to mess up the way we do optimization of our marketing campaigns. So today, we're going to have kind of two halves. The first half is going to be more presentation focused. You're going to be hearing from the experts in the field. So first we have ComScore. So Timur is going to talk about viewability, fraud, and ad blocking altogether from the point of view of ComScore. And then Michael Tiffany from White Ops is going to really go deep on the bots, right? So talking about how advanced they are and kind of the financial motive, right? They're there to make money. So the bots are tuned to make money. And then Harrison from Google will kind of give the perspective from the consumers and the reasons they use ad blocking and maybe some opportunities for publishers to actually develop a relationship with the consumer so that they actually turn off the ad blockers. And then finally, Dr. Johnny Ryan from PageFair, they specialize on ad blocking measurement. He couldn't join us in person, but he taped a video for us, so we'll see his video presentation. So we're going to hit each of these topics one after another, and then we're going to take a break. And then the second half, David Cole is going to lead a conversation where it's really roll up your sleeves. Let's talk about it, because what we're really trying to get at is what are some solutions? We might not be able to solve everything today, but at least we can have either some best practices or a couple of action items that we can take back to our respective companies and act upon right away. So that's kind of the setup of the afternoon. Let me have Timur come up, and we'll start off with the presentation from ComScore. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Perfect. Great, thanks, Augustine, and welcome to everybody. And I first want to thank the ARF for hosting this event, and also congratulate everyone who showed up today, because the topics of ad fraud, viewability, and blocking can be a little daunting, and under certain circumstances can be a little difficult to talk about. Some might say depressing in some ways. Maybe less depressing than the political conventions, so maybe it's a welcome relief from that. But I congratulate everyone on showing up, and I think the fact that we're having this meeting to the ARF is a huge step forward for the industry, and that we're having an open dialogue about it is a huge step forward from even 2 years ago. So, is this the clicker, by the way? Okay. Or perhaps 3 years ago. I guess people can measure. So again, I think it's great that the ARF and there are other industry bodies showing leadership in that sense, and I think that's great. So I wanted to start out. I was initially going to ask, kind of more on a personal level, when each of you can look back and for me personally, I became very aware of ad fraud back in 2012, 2013, because I was running a startup and had raised capital, and we were hit very hard by a partner that was trying to essentially launder impressions through our network, and we actually faced a do or die time in the business, and I had multiple sleepless nights. So I'm going to ask, personally, when everyone became aware of fraud, but as I look in the room, I feel like this group might be very biased in terms of your background, and we're not the normal ad tech audience here. So I have a feeling that many of you have been aware of the issue for quite some time. So I'll ask the question differently. When do you think the industry has really become aware of, fraud primarily, but also blocking? So show of hands, how many do you think 2016 and this type of event is the first time there's been broad awareness, either for you personally or for the industry? How many would say 2016 is the first time there's been broad awareness of the fraud issues? Okay. How about 2015? Okay, a couple. And 2014? Okay, that's about when it was for me. 2013, earlier? Okay, so 2014 to 2015 are the most, maybe 2014. And people were aware of click fraud before that. Let me ask the follow-up question then. So how many of you would say you are on the buy side of our industry and you're actually spending regularly? So Joe? Okay, great. How many would say you're on the platform side? Okay, about 8. And then how many would be on the sell side? Okay, so about an even mix, actually, relatively a third. So this is a great group to have this dialogue with. And again, going back to the first point, I want to thank the ARF for having that, but also, Augustine, Michael, all of us, Conrad, this is exactly the type of dialogue we need to have to combat the problem. So we go out and compete on a day-to-day basis to offer our services for, blocking, viewability detection, fraud detection. We are competing, but we also realize that this type of forum, interchange of ideas, is critical to improving the perception of our industry overall. So to me, there is nobody in this room who is a competitor. That's my perspective. I would like to take a page from a lot of what happens in the cybersecurity industry, where we know the threats are out there and we have to talk about them, help close those gaps, and it's going to definitely lift the tide, lift all boats on that tide. So my initial points. So as much as I can, I'm going to try and talk about the intersection of fraud, viewability, and blocking. I don't think there is one easy answer. If anybody has it, please just tell me now. But there's quite a few points we go through. And as Gail had said, we want to look at the data as much as we can. And I think Gail, did cover quite a bit of this. So obviously, today's never-ending web, the measurement must be everywhere. You said, by the way, 2 of the platforms you mentioned were illegal out of the 25 screens. What are those 2 illegals? Okay. Okay. All right. So this is obviously what we're seeing. Now, we recently merged with RenTrack, and so we're more aware than ever of the TV and the set-top box data. But we talk typically about fraud in the context of display and of video. Does anybody have a good example of what fraud looks like in an in-app environment? People have a tougher time describing it, but sure, go ahead. Yeah, that's a great example. Michael, you had another one too?
Outright fakery of apps altogether.
You have
Just fake apps.
people
right.
that are doing replay attacks on mobile networks, so they don't even have mobile apps. They're scaling mobile traffic across.
Right. So those are both great examples. Now, I knew this crowd was biased because we had a lot of hands shoot up when we get in app. Most of the time when we go present to more of a layman crowd, I think people have a harder time envisioning how could somebody fake traffic on a phone or in an app environment. And even what I'll point to is, well, how hard is it to set your browser to be a mobile emulator? So you could have anybody build a botnet just by emulating mobile that way. So again, we have a very highly technical group here, and I think that's great. We also have to start to think of an industry. What does fraud look like and viewability look like in these? So we don't know that there's a lot of fraud right now in OTT on Netflix. Do we have to worry about it? No, but there's not a ton of ad dollars necessarily flowing there yet. So we know that when the ad dollars start flowing, the people are going to come up with ways to emulate and defraud Netflix or Amazon, etc. So these are important points that we'll want to think through. Our research shows so far, and this is from our initial launch of what we're calling our total home panel. So we have average of 10 active devices, 17 plus active devices with 5 people. Again, Gail had mentioned that. In each case, what does the mode of fraud look like with that activity? Definitely points out that IP blacklisting or IP whitelisting is not going to necessarily be a very effective tool. You may be hitting a particular ISP or a home, maybe coming from one particular area or one computer that's been compromised. Again, I think most people in this crowd know that, but it shows the difficulty that we face as an industry. We have this incredible opportunity to measure and grow the pie for everyone. At the same time, we have a multiplication of threats every time we add a new platform. We also know that programmatic has a tendency to be more vulnerable to these threats, but there is no slowdown that I know of dollars moving to programmatic. Now, I think it was Joe's group. Group M was one of the first to announce we're moving off the open exchanges. I think, is that right, Joe? Being accurate. So, and I don't think anybody can blame them for that. But as far as I know, we're not seeing a slowdown of dollars towards programmatic, especially when you look at the rise of the programmatic TV platforms. So we have to be realistic about that. The efficiency that comes with programmatic is too attractive to buyers and sellers to not continue ahead. Absolutely right. Yeah. So Joe's comment is getting out of the open exchanges doesn't mean getting out of programmatic. It may mean moving to private marketplaces. And there's lots of ways that we'll want to talk about how can you get the advantages of programmatic with lower fraud and more secure. And you can still work with premium publishers in a programmatic sense. Absolutely. That's a good point. So I think the key questions that we want to coalesce around, I think we're open to, as a group, talking about is, you know, how can I reduce waste due to invalid traffic across all platforms? So you can use fraud, botnet, IVT, I think fairly interchangeably. So I tend to use IVT now. Fraud is a very loaded question, a very loaded term. What role does viewability actually play in reach and frequency and ROI? And how much does ad blocking actually impact my campaign? I think ad blocking is probably the area of least research right now. It is relatively new, as Augustine mentioned. We've got some initial results that I'll preview here. I'm very interested in seeing what Google has to say about it and others. But it's certainly, I think we just need one more issue, and we could say it's the 4 horsemen, but now we just have the 3 horsemen. So these are certainly challenges. So in terms of talking about IVT first and these other key points, as Gail mentioned also, we can't stay away from going cross-platform and measuring cross-platform. So to add on to what the ARF says, when we look at Hulu, what we've measured, if you look at desktop viewing plus mobile plus OTT television plus co-viewing, you're getting an overall almost 95% boost of engagement and distribution and viewership. So there's no way around this. We have to take it into account. And again, for the purposes of this discussion, matter of talking about, I think we have a very good idea of what fraud viewability looks like in desktop. We're making great strides in mobile, but there's still more that needs to be done in app. When we start talking about OTT, co-viewing in general, but the various platforms here within gaming, it starts to get much more complicated. The other thing I think we need to say, and probably need to do a better job of communicating as an industry, is we are holding ourselves to a standard that other forms of media may not be. When we even start to have this conversation, that we can detect what's happening across these platforms, I would like to know, what the newspaper industry or the old world broadcast industry would say if a buyer approached them and said, "You're selling me over the air TV impressions. I only want to pay when somebody's in the room watching my ad and they happen to be of my target demographic." I worked with local broadcasters for a long time, and there's clearly no local TV stations that are selling their inventory on that basis. So we have to acknowledge that when we know what the issues are, we have to be careful that we're not holding ourselves to an unfairly high standard. The same, by the way, as Gail mentioned with Kellogg's, we did an index of campaign effectiveness, which has a lot to do with branding effectiveness, not just click-throughs. Taking into account TV print, digital, all the way through, huge increase in overall campaign effectiveness. So this data that I'm about to show comes from ComScore's VCE norms. So Validated Campaign Essentials is our platform. All of us in this room know that all data is susceptible to bias. I don't think anybody can argue with that. So this data is VCE norms. So we're taking data from our ad verification platform. Therefore, obviously, we're taking data from folks who are buying and selling and are paying to have their data verified. That is very different than doing a study of an open platform or an open exchange. So I would be absolutely shocked if Michael didn't show some different numbers and Augustine didn't show some different numbers, et cetera. But this is one point of view. This represents the norms for the ComScore universe, which is, arguably the third largest footprint out there behind Google and Facebook when you take into account our panel data and our census data and all the assets that we have. So we generally allocate we see about 7% of traffic overall being lost to IVT, which I think is a distinct improvement from 2014. But when you take 7% of the overall spend market, that's still in the billions of dollars range. About 45% is non-viewable, and then 48% is viewable. So we have a ways to go on that. Now, we see clear differences in both display and desktop video between buys and our programmatic buys. Again, programmatic can mean a lot of things, and as Joe talked about, buyers can move away from open exchanges while still taking advantage of programmatic efficiencies. Look at the disparity, though, between direct and programmatic in video. I think that's probably still the most surprising number to me, and I believe that's corroborated by the ANA white ops studies that have been put out over time. We still see that being a major focal point. So big surprise, money may chase the highest CPM dollars. The high value, we see a huge increase in invalid traffic when we start evaluating video versus desktop display. Harder to measure in some cases. Also, video may not all be sold on a cost per click or deeper into the attribution funnel basis. So still a bit harder to defend, I think, on video. Certainly very possible, though. And when we look at programmatic specifically, the IVT levels just in general, huge increase when we get deeper into the programmatic platforms. So one way, I think we need to come up with some ways to tie this together. So talking to our data science team, who is my co-founder from M.Labs. So M.Labs is our data science startup that Comscore acquired a couple of years ago to help fight fraud. Our data science team doesn't see, one key between fraud, viewability, and blocking. I think it has to do with the quality of publishers. Clearly, we can all make some assumptions that the browsing experience for a consumer should impact how likely they are to go and reach for an ad blocker. So as we have had the growth in maybe lower quality programmatic sites, as we've loaded relatively an infinite number of scripts or tags onto a page, it certainly impacts that browsing experience, and I think makes us all more or less likely to reach for that blocker. So how do we get beyond that? How do we measure, just instead of one isolated instance, how do we measure what people are actually hitting? So we do try and talk sometimes about an in-target rate. And an in-target rate, when we're talking about within VCE, can mean something different for every campaign, because your version of in-target for your campaign will be different from another person's version of in-target who's trying to reach a different demographic. So this data shows overall across telecom, computer tech, et cetera, our customers, how often are they hitting their in-target as measured by whatever they've set up for their campaign. So overall, it is right in the 45% range, and it varies across the product categories. You can see telecom goes highest, on down to CPG. And there's a variety of reasons for that. But would that in-target rate be the same if we were looking at TV versus newspaper versus other spend? We also look at the publisher categories, and there's probably too many for you to read here. You can see the slides, but the in-target rate peaks at, probably no surprise, social media is almost some of the easiest to determine your demographic, on down to gaming at the far end. Last couple slides here. Here's the fraud breakout between premium sites specifically, and then programmatic exchanges on video. So you look at almost a 350% increase. Shows where you need to be cautious. Now we talk about premium sites and how do you work with premium sites that are still programmatic efficiencies. We recently released a study that show that ads on premium sites do prove more effective. I think we quoted about a 67% lift in brand effectiveness. That's a very good data point. Obviously, the easy return argument is, well, if I'm paying 300 to 400% more for those ads, is a 67% lift in effectiveness worth it? So that dimension needs to be discussed, but there are other points, and I think both sides of the equation need to be debated. But I don't think it's debatable that premium publishers do pose a lower risk from a pure, fraud viewability standpoint. Okay, I'll skip to this last couple of charts here. One of the preview points that I wanted to show for ad blocking, as we talked about quality view issues, this is actually a preview of a paper that our data science team has submitted and was just accepted to be published at the Internet Measurement Conference, which will be in November. So this is a basic heat map of ad blocking by state. You can see it's highest on the West Coast. I think Oregon has the highest penetration of ad blockers that we see. This next slide here is by country: United States, UK, and Germany. I don't think ad blocking is a new phenomenon in many parts of Europe, but really has taken off in Germany. And as Gail mentioned, 18 to 34, 18 to 35 males are far and away the most likely to use ad blockers. Our number is about 18% of US users are regularly using ad blocking. I think Group M has quoted 22%. Is that right, Joe? So it is a massive trend, and I think it's something we have to address. Okay, with that, the final questions that I would recommend we tack back to all of our teams: have we gone too far with the idea of by audience anywhere? Again, how do we measure fraud and viewability in a cross-platform world? Have we fully evaluated the ROI, premium sites relative to exchanges? Are we actively experimenting with paid content and interstitial options relative to ad blockers? And then finally, are we testing both MRC and non-MRC accredited solutions to this? Because the MRC is a very valuable body, but it moves at its own pace. And certainly the botnets and the blockers move at a very different and much faster pace. So thank you. Look forward to talking more after this.
Thank you, Timur. I think we have time for a couple questions before I move on to the next speaker. Any questions now? If not, that's totally fine. But, yes.
You're showing like higher numbers for like video as compared to display. Like, what do you think is driving that?
So the question is, what do we think is the higher numbers for videos compared to display? I think it's as simple as higher dollars, higher vulnerability. So if a botnet can execute a couple million fraudulent impressions against a video campaign, the CPMs are certainly higher, where they get bigger bang for their buck. And then also video is still measured, and the attribution funnel in video is still a bit more complex and not as developed, so it might be easier to penetrate. Finally, the demand for video far outstrips the supply. So people are desperate to get their video campaigns run. It's harder to fulfill.
So you said that it was in target. So is that your VCE definition of viewable and in a particular demographic target?
Yeah, the question is, so the definition of in target, in that case, the study is the client's definition of it. So we took the campaign measurement of in target and lay that out. So, and look forward to talking more. And yeah.
Thank you, Timur. Let me introduce Michael Tiffany from White Ops, a fellow human. He's the co-founder and chief executive officer of White Ops. They are a bot detection specialist. So, Michael, take it away.
Hi, guys. All right. Now I'm going to do a clicker check. Oh, that is quite a delay. Okay, so I have 40 slides. It's 2:48. I have 20 minutes to talk. So I'm going to go extremely fast. And just bear with me, and hopefully we'll uncover a lot of interesting information for Q&A later. Here's what I want to talk about, and this is why I have 40 slides. I'd love to spend some time on what we call the ad fraud threat model, which is how the fraud game actually works and how the money changes hands. And dwell for some time about why ad fraud operations continue to defeat detection now, several years after attention has been brought to this issue, and despite the efforts of a lot of smart people in this industry. Then some specifics about the macroeconomics of fraud, what we call the profit window, and then get to open problems in the estimation of the total size of the problem. One thing we know for sure is that the scope of this problem is in the billions of dollars. What we don't know, or what I should say, is a point of contention, is exactly how many billions, and that's because of difficulties in extrapolating global scope. But before I talk about those difficulties, I want to make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of how this works. So what I'm going to talk about is the fraud that succeeds, not the fraud that doesn't succeed. So there, of course, are lots of different ways of defrauding ad campaigns, and it doesn't all involve botnets. It's just that botnet ad fraud scales the best in terms of dollars, and we don't really care about attempts at fraud that get caught by the good guys. So I'm only going to talk about the sophisticated stuff that doesn't get caught. That is primarily built out of bots that are coming from inside the house, which is to say that it's coming from real people's computers that have been infected with malware and they have no idea. And those malware processes are inflating the number of web views that are happening all the time. I'm also not talking about the invalid traffic that comes from all kinds of automated agents that sort of accidentally commit fraud. You may have seen statistics about how the majority of web traffic is now bot, not human. This is true. That doesn't mean that the majority of advertising spending is going to those bots, because a lot of it is getting successfully filtered out. And now hopefully the industry broadly, and under the leadership of the MRC, has some language to differentiate between general invalid traffic, kind of table stakes automated traffic that everyone should be able to identify as long as they try, and sophisticated invalid traffic. This is the stuff being operated by criminal botnets that are actively trying to evade detection, which is to say not only are they trying not to get caught, but the day after they do get caught, they're trying again to figure out how and then evade continuing detection. And broadly speaking, just this, as narrowly defined, the sophisticated invalid traffic that's succeeding at making billions of dollars is happening on the backs of millions of consumers' machines. The point of my company, White Ops, is really to fight on behalf of ordinary consumers. Ad fraud is unbelievably profitable. This is what's driving all of our computers to get broken into, and infection rates are extraordinary. So this is happening. This adorable map of bot traffic pretty much perfectly maps to the population centers of the United States. Now, just building up from the ground up, so we have a whole bunch of people's computers. They've been infected with malware. They don't know. So they're continuing to use the computers that have been infected. And I'm using computers broadly. I mean internet-connected devices. How do the bad guys turn this into money? Well, the fungible asset here, the thing that a botnet operator sells, is visits. So the value prop goes like this. I can sell you 10 million uniques an hour. And there are two kinds of customers of botnet traffic sold on a per visit basis. First of all, you have ad fraud site operators that specifically build websites that are built for fraud. And they monetize those on the long tail. And then secondly, you have a kind of buyer of a bot traffic that we call traffic brokers that sell visitors onto legitimate publishers. So the bogus websites, they're polluting programmatic buys on open exchanges, long tail buys on networks, run of network kinds of buys. You know, it's all the long tail buying that we do in this industry to monetize smaller websites. Turns out that a lot of that is bogus. Sometimes those grow really large. So a few years ago, toothbrushing.net was hilariously one of the highest volume websites on the internet. Much more recently, on AdX in the UK, cookthefood.com was more popular than the Daily Mail in terms of page views being monetized successfully on that exchange, which is pretty hilarious. I invite you to visit cookthefood.com. It doesn't really look that compelling. Cook the Food has that audience because they're buying successful bot traffic. But some of the most sophisticated fraud is showing up on name brand websites. And let me dwell for a minute on exactly how that works. So you have some real website that has a human audience, but is goosing the numbers because they're working with a third party to drive more visits to their website. And when they use those third parties, it doesn't necessarily feel like they're engaging in some kind of crime. What they're doing is they're engaging with someone who claims to be a search engine marketing firm or social media marketing firm or audience platform or something that justifies how they can drive traffic to your website, and they'll charge you on a PPC basis. White Ops doesn't do name drops of any kind. We don't want to play a naming and shaming game, but I will point you to an just unbelievable piece of investigative journalism that Business Week did a few months ago. If you just Google for like Business Week ad fraud, you'll find this article. Where what I loved about this piece of investigative journalism is that they found a major media empire, I mean a centuries-old media empire that was using traffic brokers to goose the visits to their websites, which were monetized via video advertising. And when Business Week came calling, the publisher talked and explained where they were getting their audience from, and so then the reporters went one level deeper and talked to Boris in Brooklyn, who went on the record explaining like his life as a traffic broker. It's awesome. And Boris sells PPC traffic to any websites that want to pay him for doing that. And fascinatingly, Boris is still selling traffic, and Giant Media Empire is still buying it after this expose went live, and I'll explain why that still works and why that traffic continues to evade detection. So a quick summary of how all the ad fraud gets paid for. Obviously, at the top or the beginning of the chain, advertiser is loading money in the top, and they're buying through some kind of concentrator, some kind of platform that's distributing ads across a large number of sites, and some of those are just the totally bogus ones, the cookthefood.coms of the world. And then even on direct buys, even high CPM direct buys with name brand media organizations, if anyone between the advertiser and the website where an ad ends up is trying to game the system by goosing the inventory numbers in any way, by working with any third party who is themselves concentrating bot traffic, then we got bots in the mix that are being served a portion of those ads. All right. And importantly, this means that bot traffic serves a kind of macroeconomic function in this ecosystem, which is to fill in the gap between however much advertising is getting bought today and the actual people who are on the internet browsing around who could possibly get advertised to. And this leads to some fascinating distortions in this market. And so I would like to add some detail to the question about why video in particular gets distorted. It's not just video that gets distorted. Actually, it's any kind of media where the growth in demand has exceeded the growth in supply and the prices magically haven't moved. So when marketers are suddenly like en masse shifting dollars to Hispanic targeted ad campaigns, and there isn't a consequent rise in U.S. Hispanics browsing the internet more, then what should happen is CPM should go through the roof. And magically, this never happens. There's always an infinite amount of supply available for no matter how narrowly you want to target your advertising. And it's the bots that fill in this gap. And they're pulled into the ecosystem. It's not like there's these like super arch genius black hat criminals who see 5 moves ahead in Procter & Gamble's advertising strategies. Instead, what happens is someone on the supply side is running out of inventory. They pre-sold some stuff, and then the spot sales are such that they just need some more visitors. And so they turn to their third-party traffic partners to give them more visitors, and that's how the fraud is pulled into the system. And the brilliant thing about that is it makes the bot traffic responsive to the KPIs that marketers care about. It's not the cyber criminals who know about demographic shifts in ad buying habits. It's that someone who's operating a website calls the traffic broker and says, "We're not reaching enough Hispanics." And the traffic broker says, "No problem, bro, I got you." And then Hispanics start hitting your website. Because how do we know that they're Hispanics? It actually just has to do with the cookie profiles of the bots that visit. And it turns out that all of those kinds of numbers are gameable. Or when it comes to performance metrics, if you're not tracking to something that bots don't do, like a credit card transaction, if you're tracking to any other KPI, any measure of engagement, then that's something that's monitorable, not just by the bot brokers who employ every kind of analytics package that marketers do, but also the publishers that are buying the traffic, so they can verify. They're like, I need the traffic that clicks more. I need the traffic that has higher viewability. Whatever it is, they'll tune their orders of traffic to respond to the KPIs that they need to hit. Now, that leads me to how it is that fraud continues to evade detection. Importantly, if you're playing this game, the game of fraud detection, you have to not just be able to detect fraud today, you actually need to have techniques that survive an onslaught of reverse engineering once you have enough scale to impact the adversary. So everyone who's alive and doing ad fraud today, everyone who hasn't given up already, has a kind of platform advantage in malware that's sophisticated and has survived detection against ad analytics startups and also extraordinary platforms filled with data scientists like Google and Facebook and Quantcast and Yahoo and AOL. And they're running essentially multi-million-dollar fraud operations. So the motivation to figure out how they're getting caught and then adapt against it is extraordinarily high. Got it. So this has led to widespread defeat of ad detection at any given time with signals in the marketplace, so that if you're a buyer of bot traffic, you can actually buy the traffic that is tuned to defeat this or that detection mechanism. And we've seen at White Ops that a tremendous amount of bot detection is what we consider to be behavioral. So notionally, the idea on the part of the good guys is that it is by presupposing that there is some human quality that bots can't have. And so if we just look for that quality, then we'll naturally only select for the humans and not for the bots, which is provably false again and again. We see this not just in the faking of simple performance elements like viewability, but also in more sophisticated elements of interaction, like moving the mouse around, engaging with content, clicking deep into a site, etc. And a lot of the adaptation cycle on the part of the botnet operators is about figuring out what the thresholds for acting human are, and then tuning the bot behaviors in order to fly just under the detection thresholds. We're not seeing yet a tremendous amount of innovation at the actual rootkit level, which has actually surprised me personally. I'd expect the code base to be updated more frequently, but what's happening instead is that the bot behaviors get updated very, very frequently, but it'll still, BDEP is still built out of the same IE browser engine that it's always been built on, and the reason why it's gone dark as far as most detection mechanisms are now concerned is just that it's gotten more sophisticated at copying real human mouse movements, which is kind of blows my mind. Now, the fundamental way in which bots are capable of mimicking humans is by actually copying humans. So for instance, at White Ops, we had this really fun parlor game for a while where we were paying attention to different bot mouse movement strategies, and we had names for the authors of different bots, because there was like Spiderweb guy who moved the mouse cursor in this complex spider web, and there was random noise guy, and there was nesting staircase guy, and in each case, if you looked at how the bots move the mouse around, if you just looked at a graph of it, you could tell that no human being would do that. And so this was really fun, and we actually made some fun office art out of it. But a lot of that has gone away. Only the dumb botnets are now moving the mice very mechanically. Instead, we're seeing perfect organic mouse movement out of botnet operators, and it's not because any botnet operator has developed brilliant new breakthrough AI to teach bots how to move mice like humans. It's just that since 70% of this crime is done on the backs of ordinary people's computers, and those ordinary people are using their trackpads and mice, you can just inform the bot to move their cursor exactly like the owner of the machine. So since all of our ad analytics kind of implicitly trust the endpoint, the successful bot strategies all turn on the fact that if their fraud impressions are emerging from real logged in users with real cookies and real purchase histories, then their bot traffic essentially gets whitelisted. And there continues to be a basic pervasive false belief that if you know that that's Bob and you know about Bob's past purchase, then you can confidently serve him a bot and fraud can't possibly happen. The trouble is that if Bob's phone or computer is compromised with malware, then you think you're serving Bob. You're really just serving Bob's device, and you're getting taken for billions of dollars. So this is the level of sophisticated fraud that is like where all the action is. There are actually much less sophisticated fraud operations, but the adversaries that are using real people's computers and then perfectly mimicking human behavior and possibly even copying real cookies are the ones that lead to this being a multi-billion-dollar problem that wasn't already solved just because of the natural data science in this market. Oh, I got off to a late start, so I think I get a couple more minutes. Okay, so while not all fraud is that sophisticated, because of the survivor bias, that sophisticated fraud, which might be a fraction of all possible infections or even a fraction of all the fraudulent impressions, are the cause of most of the dollar losses. Bear in mind that 10% if 10% of traffic is fraudulent, that doesn't necessarily mean that 10% of dollars were lost. And in order to successfully take on this problem, you need not just like some sophisticated analytics and extraordinary scale. You need to deal with an adversary who has live copies of real human sessions, who can get direct access to the output of a service, and then do A/B testing. Because bear in mind that with the financial model that I just described, the people who are buying the traffic are also looking at the output of every viewability vendor and Google Analytics and every KPI measurement system, and thereby creating a feedback loop with the botnet operators so that they know when they're succeeding at going undetected, or they know when it's time to retool the bots and upgrade them. And they can use essentially black box reverse engineering techniques at scale by dividing the botnet into small little subdivisions and trying different bot strategies with each subdivision, thereby seeing which bot strategies continue to evade detection and which ones need to be retired. I'm going to skip this and jump to the final. Here we go. This visualization was not developed by White Ops. This visualization was developed by an anti-fraud researcher named Shalin Dar, illustrating how bot brokers continue to sell only the good stuff. And this is why Boris is still in business, and this is why that media company is still goosing the numbers. Like, you'd think that getting caught with their hand in the cookie jar means that they would need to reduce their inventory to its natural level, which was like 20% of the amount of advertising that actually sell, which would mean cratering the company. Magically, they're still able to fulfill orders, and that's because they can continue to buy traffic that's known to defeat traffic verification vendors. So what Boris and his ilk do is they directly engage the same analytics companies that advertisers use to validate their traffic, and they see which bot sources get filtered and which ones don't. And because new computers are infected every day, and there's often a lag between when a computer is infected and when it finally is detected, the effect is that these brokers, the middlemen who sell PPC traffic, are always on the cutting edge of vending the fake impressions that are not going detected today. And if they go detected tomorrow, then they'll stop selling those on and sell only the fresh infections. And that's why, even though I think we've done a fairly good job of raising awareness about this problem across the entire industry, and arguably we've given the industry a case of the do somethings, the somethings that are being done are not actually effective in dropping the aggregate losses to the crime. And with that, I will hand things back to Mr. Fu. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Michael. So that was kind of a view from the edge of the abyss, right? We just heard about some of the most advanced bots that can pretty much get by any kind of detection mechanism. Okay, so now that you know that exists, Okay, just keep that in the back of your mind. We're going to really get into this in the discussion phase. But the bots are now, if you're just using detection mechanisms, a lot of them will still get by. So I think what we have to do, the work that we have to do in this room is we have to get the advertisers together and the publishers and the ad tech companies, and we have to all come together to solve this. Because if the financial incentives are still there for the bot makers to make these advanced bots, they will continue to do it all day and all night. So I'll leave it at that, and let me introduce Harrison. Harrison Gordon from Google. He's product manager at Google's sustainable advertising team, and he's going to talk to us about the ad blocking studies, and primarily from the consumer's point of view, and some tips and best practices. Harrison.
Thank you. First off, before I start, I'm going to try and make this as interactive as possible so we can wake up before we have our break. But real quick, how many people here use an ad blocker on their personal device? It's okay. The camera's not facing that way. You're not going to get recorded on this. Okay, great. About 50% of you. That's expected. Most of you are technologists. Technologists have a higher ad blocking rate because we know how to install them. So that makes sense. And when you start looking at these numbers, you're starting to notice it's not just a technologist problem anymore. We're starting to hit the mainstream. And that kind of makes sense when, if you're even on eMarketer here, you get hit with stuff like that. Constantly popping up, constantly blinking, interrupting what you're trying to read. It makes sense that you would go ahead and install that ad blocker and activate it. Much better experience, in my opinion. How about you guys? Who preferred who preferred this one? That one? Anyone? No? Okay, great. Good. No one prefers that, which now kind of makes sense why this is what people are driving towards, right? So let's actually look at the growth. These are page fare numbers, which we'll hear in video next. But 400 million mobile ad blockers, 200 million desktop ad blockers, both growing at rates that would make any startup or any mid startup really kind of swoon. 90% year-over-year growth on mobile, 40% year-over-year growth on desktop. Just to make some notes here, mobile, that's happening on a browser level, and that's happening mainly in APAC. And on desktop, that is happening globally. That's happening from browser extensions. Any questions about those? No. Okay. So, anyone have theories as to why these are going up? Yeah. Not relevant ads? No privacy? Anything else? Distracting ads. Okay. Yep, APAC, that's one of our theories too as to why you see mobile ad blockers increasing in popularity. So I hear a lot of theories. And who are we blaming? Distracting ads? Who would you blame? Tragedy of the commons. Okay. Anyone else? Any plans? No? Here's one thing. When we've started to talk with a lot of people, it turns out that with all these theories, everyone's just blaming someone else typically. Advertisers say, oh, well, it's the publishers. They're putting in bad formats. Publishers say, well, advertisers are giving us the tags. They're not respecting our bandwidth limits. They're adding all of these tags onto the page that are making all these different calls. And what it really comes down to is there's a lot of assumptions, too many assumptions about what's going wrong with this industry and with what's going wrong in respect to ad blocking. If you ever have too many assumptions, there's really only one thing that you can do to move forward, and that's to actually test those assumptions. And when you test those assumptions, where's the first place that you want to go? Anyone? Not really a right answer here. That's the great part about it.
Defining a control group.
That's okay. That's a good start. Where's the ground truth? Like what's happening when an ad blocker is installed? What was what happened? Who did that? Users. So who's installing it? Who gets the value out of ad blockers? Other than the ad blockers, users. Great. So who's the cause of ad blocker adoption? Wrong, but very close. We should start with the users. We should focus on them because they're installing ad blockers because they're saying, hey, my experience with ad blockers is better than when it's not with an when I don't have an ad blocker. So the next question is, what are the reasons for why someone does that? And there are a couple of different ways to go about this. What I'm going to show you right now is a bunch of qualitative data that we collected from a couple hundred participants across the world. Let's start with a few. In Phoenix, ads hold you hostage before you get to the information you want. So as an example, I'm going to go ahead and just say it because I'm Google and I'm representing Google here. But YouTube non-skippable ads. They hold you for 5 seconds for TrueView or 15 seconds or 30 seconds if we're talking about fully unskippable ads. If they actually advertised in a way that was less intrusive, then people wouldn't be downloading the ad blocker, says someone from London. So what does intrusive mean? We've seen people see that from a perspective of privacy and remarketing being a key sticky point there. Or the other way to think of that is pop-ups. Once again, how many times have you gone to adage.com, emarketer.com, NewYorkTimes.com, any number of publishers who have found ways to add advertisements that may not necessarily be what you want at that time? We can go even deeper. Like, we actually found some people who had some really nice stories about why they install their ad blocker. So these are people who really who really love their experience with it. This person mentioned how they save 5 seconds every time that they view a YouTube video, 10 seconds every time that they get stopped on the web, that they don't get stopped on the web because of an ad blocker. Another person says that the web is just more fun. The wrong button. Can I get the next slide? Slide 98. One more up. Great. Ooh. Oh, sorry, back. Two more, one more. Perfect. Too far. Yeah. So I'll take this as a moment of saying when you have too many ad scripts on your page, this is what scrolling looks like. I actually would be really curious how ad fraud would or how ad bots might be able to mimic that behavior. If I see smooth scrolling, maybe that's actually a good indicator. Save a lot of time. In the next slide, we hear someone talking about how it's just more fun. It's easier. And once again, when you look at a page with ads and without ads, it's a stark difference. How many people own a publisher property? How many people work with publishers? How many of you have looked at their page with ad blocker and without ad blocker? Of the people who raised their hands, which version was better, in your opinion? Blocked version is almost always better. Anyone else? Great. I think that kind of clears up exactly what Melissa's saying. Next. Improve the speed of the internet connection. Once again, less bandwidth, faster speed, faster connection. Also in terms of the jitteriness, as I mentioned before, if you have a page that is loaded with viewability tags, it's going to judder as you scroll, especially if they're not implemented properly. And that causes some really, really nasty behavior. It pushes people away from the web. Next slide. So what we're hearing is users tell us bad ad experiences are driving ad blocker demand. This shouldn't be a surprise. This should be really obvious. But once again, having data to back up these kinds of statements is really important, especially as we start going into which experiences are the bad experiences. So next slide. When we did all that qualitative research, we found that 35 to 70% of users were saying that ads that distract or block content are what cause them to install an ad blocker. So once again, getting a little bit deeper with the qualitative data, but once again, doesn't really tell us what is distracting, what is annoying. So once again, this is going to be a theme for this. We need to go back to the user. We need to understand what the user is saying. And there's been a lot of stuff out there. Who's read the reports from AO, or actually IAB just recently published a report. A lot of great stuff. A lot of it is survey-based. Quantitative in the fact that it's scaled, but also a lot of qualitative reports. In fact, that people are saying what they desire. Another way to look at this would be quantitatively. Because what we've noticed, especially with a lot of our research and across all of Google, not just in ads, is that people say things and people do things, and those things aren't necessarily the same. So if we go up one more slide. So we started working on a new way of testing everyday ad experiences. Instead of saying, what do you think of pop-ups? We say, hey, why don't you read this really nice article? And the article is a nice article. We put it with a fake brand just to make sure no one's getting hurt when we do these tests. But what we do is we basically have them sit down in front of an article and read it. And some users, we give no ads. Some users, we give maybe a static inline ad. Some users, we give an animated ad. Some users, we give a flashing ad. Some ads, some people, we give vignettes or interstitials. Some we give sticky ads on the bottom. Some we give sticky ads on the top. Some of them we put a pop-up in there. Sometimes we make them wait 10 seconds of the pop-up. Sometimes we add latency. There's all sorts of different things that we can do here. But the great thing is that we can do direct comparisons between each one of these different types of ads. And we can ask all sorts of questions once they're done. Because once they've experienced it, that's when it's deepest and most impactful in their mind. So when we ask questions at that point, we get a lot of really, really great information. Move to the next slide. So as an example, one of the questions that we ask after you've done that is, how annoying was the ad experience, or how annoying was the experience overall? And this is what we're getting. So is everyone aware of Sticky? The mobile ad format, sticks to your bottom of your page. Animated, everyone's aware of animated ads. And pop-ups, everyone aware of pop-ups. How many people love pop-ups on mobile? How many people buy pop-ups on mobile? They also are called interstitials. Anyone buying interstitials? No? Okay. Good. All right. So let's take a look at this graph. Sticky ads. Extremely and very annoying. Very, very small amounts. As you go up, you'll see that most people find it not at all annoying. Animated, a little bit more annoying. That's actually statistically significant. So we can say with pretty strong certainty, an animated ad is worse than a sticky ad. And here you can see very clearly pop-ups. Pop-ups have a bit of a PR problem. They're not found very fun. Not a lot of people find them not at all annoying. Some people apparently do prefer the pop-up. That's okay. Everyone has their preference, but the majority is kind of spoken. This is the kind of information, this is the kind of research that we don't think has been done yet, but we think is really, really important when we start having these conversations of what's a good ad, what's a bad ad. Why are users blocking us, and why are users not blocking us? Next slide. So the research is still ongoing. We're working with a lot of people to make sure this research is right and this research is doing the right thing. But I want to make sure there are a couple of takeaways that you can get from this now. The first one is that ad blocking is caused by bad ad experiences. It's not because ad blockers exist. It's not because ad blockers are taking money from publishers or advertisers. It's not because users hate publishers or hate advertisers or even hate ads. It's because the experiences that we've provided them as the ad ecosystem have been bad. The second thing, everyone needs to improve their ad experiences. It's not an ad network problem. It's not a publisher problem. It's not an advertiser problem. The entire ecosystem needs to work together. And as mentioned before, it is a tragedy of the common scenario, where any one publisher who creates a bad ad experience, any one ad network that continues to push bad ads, or any one advertiser that creates bad ad experiences. When someone installs an ad blocker, they are blocking everyone's ads, not just the bad ones. So it's everyone's problem. We need to be self-policing, and we need to be able to work together on this. And finally, and as I mentioned before, consumers aren't blaming publishers and advertisers. They're blaming everyone. They honestly, if you ask a lot of people who place that ad there, they don't really know. They just know it's an ad. They know publishers make money from it. They think if they don't click on it, they're not making money. That's another interesting thing. They just don't really understand our network. They don't understand our ecosystem. They don't understand the value proposition that advertising gives them. So understanding that, understanding how we can better better serve them, because that is ultimately who we're serving. And second, make sure that they're aware of the benefits and value that we provide them as an ad ecosystem. Those two things together, I think, could have a really, really strong impact. Next. So once again, we need to listen to users. It's important to understand the values that advertisers and publishers bring to our ecosystem. And once again, I think everyone here really gets those perspectives. But one that's often overlooked is users. And sometimes I feel that it can be kind of hostile, especially to ad blockers, because they are kind of, in a way, ad blocking does threaten this ecosystem. It threatens the livelihood and the vibrancy of the publisher ecosystem that we have today, that it helps monetize. But it's really important to understand that these same users are the ones that all of this publishing is made for. These are the people that our advertisers are trying to reach. And seeing them as an adversary is not the right way to approach this at all. I think it's a great way to alienate them even further, and further the use of ad blocking or other ad block-like devices.
All right, so now we're gonna go on a networking break, coffee break, but we do have a taped video of about 10 or 12 minutes from Johnny Ryan. So he's head of ecosystem from PageFair, and they're a company that specializes in measuring ad blocking. So Mark is gonna cue that up, but we have a networking break until 4 p.m. and then we'll regather here, and then David will lead the roundtable discussions. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the Advertising Research Foundation for organizing this event and for inviting me and PageFair to participate. What I want to do today is separate my remarks into two parts. On the one hand, there's the bad news, which is how ad blocking happened, how it works, where it came from. On the other hand, there's the good news, which is that there is an opportunity from ad blocking that I think the advertising industry and publishers can exploit, and which will improve the quality of content across the web. And by the end of today, in this presentation, I want to leave you with the idea that there improve the quality of content across the web. And by the end of today, I want to leave you with the idea that there are two webs, two distinctly different things. On the one hand, there's the normal web with which we're familiar. On the other, there's an entirely different web. It's called the blocked web. And this is where people are blocking ads. These two webs have different rules, and advertising on them works in different ways. But first, let me give you an introduction. I'd like to thank the Advertising Research Foundation for organizing this event and for inviting me and PageFair to participate. What I want to do today is separate my remarks into two parts. On the one hand, there's the bad news, which is how ad blocking happened, how it works, where it came from. On the other hand, there's the good news, which is that there is an opportunity from ad blocking that I think the advertising industry and publishers can exploit, and which will improve the quality of content across the web. And by the end of today, in this presentation, I want to leave you with the idea that there are two webs, two distinctly different things. On the one hand, there is the normal web with which we're familiar. On the other, there is an entirely different web. It's called the blocked web. And this is where people are blocking ads. These two webs have different rules, and advertising on them works in different ways. But first, let me give you an introduction to PageFair and where it came from. A group of computer scientists emerged from Trinity College Dublin and founded a company called Demonware. And Demonware's role was to enable the multiplayer games like Call of Duty and Guitar Hero that brought millions of players together across networks. Now, some of those people then, once that company was sold by them to Activision, went on to become publishers in their own right. And so from 2010 onwards, as publishers of a computer game site, the founders of PageFair found that they were dealing with ad blocking firsthand. They were suffering the consequences. And as network scientists, they started to look for solutions. So that's the background to why PageFair has been active in this space for so long, and also why its research has become the industry standard for understanding the phenomenon. Now let's quickly recap on the status quo by looking at some of that research. And when you look at the US figures, the figures for the United States between 2014 and 2015, you see that there was almost 50% growth up to the middle of 2015, to the point where 15% of the online population were blocking ads. And when you plot that on a chart, you see quite a scary trend line that moves high and to the right. But we've been looking at these figures for so long that we see something a little bit different. We see something linear. And what we're seeing is a phenomenon that is growing not exponentially, but linearly. And in a sense, it has been overhyped because it is actually growing steadily. There is an acute danger, but actually it's not quite as immediate as some of the hype would have suggested. Some people have called this the apocalypse. We don't call it that. This is a different story. In our minds, ad blocking is different. It's irreversible, it's incipient, it's inevitable, but it's not immediate. So a better analogy for ad blocking is climate change. And think of polar melt. It is deadly, but it's not immediate. And so you cannot just think about the short term when you think about ad blocking. You're thinking about the slow and steady ebbing away of the audience over time. Yes, it is catastrophic, but it has been caused by a focus on short-term wins, and the solutions have to be more mature than that approach. So think about what ad blocking is. It is a crisis of the commons. And what this means is that we have, as an industry or a sector, abused the common resource of audience attention to the point where the audience attention is now very severely damaged, and that effect is getting worse. And the question to everyone in this sector is, will your next campaign or initiative do this? Will it further melt the ice? And this drip-drip effect, which one does not notice every day, shines clearly when you see the global figures. So this is the global picture up to the middle of 2015, which are the most recent figures we've released for desktop ad blocking at PageFair. You're seeing that by the middle of 2015, we are hitting the 200 million mark. Now, I want to show you something that we haven't previously released, and this is the correlation between digital video spend and the rise of ad blocking. It's clear to me that there is some degree of correlation there, and that probably the offender here has been non-skippable video pre-roll. Now, we've been tracking this phenomenon and releasing reports for several years. And what we find as we survey people who block ads is that this is spreading virally person to person by word of mouth. And when you think of why ad blocking has happened, I think it's useful to think about an entire ad blocking cycle that describes this phenomenon. And the cycle begins with the need for publishers to monetize content that they are generally giving away for free. And this need leads to entirely unrestrained advertising. In other words, an increase in ad volume and page clutter, an increase in the interruption of the user's experience, and an increase in data snooping. And what that does, in turn, is it leads to a decline in audience goodwill, a decline in the attention to ads, and an absolute decline in trust and a breakdown of the relationship between the publisher and the publisher's visitor. And ultimately, that causes the ad blocking by the user. And when you look at any survey for why people ad block, you get the following list. These reasons always appear. Ads obscure content, or an advertising experience surprises someone in a way that they don't like. Ads infringe on privacy. Ads have an impact on bandwidth and might increase your data tariff charges. Ads are heavy and might slow the page load of a website, or ads infringe security. You will always see one or other of these items on a list of reasons why people ad block in any of the surveys that are available, and they'll be in different order. They're presented in no particular order here, but there's one item that you'll never see on any of these surveys, and that is because they can. People block ads because they now have the ability to do so. So a useful historical lesson is to consider the Blaboff remote control, which was first released in 1952. This is a picture of an old remote control. There are many different models. But although this technology appeared in the early 50s and took decades before it became the norm, I think it's a useful analogy because we can imagine that actually ad blocking will eventually one day become the norm too. So it's useful now to think about who in the industry is feeling the pain and who is actually not feeling the pain from ad blocking. And when you separate the industry into demand and supply, and you start to look at who is actually hurting. So the people who are feeling the pain acutely here are definitely the publishers. And I want to quickly, having shown you the desktop figures, give a sense of what's happening with mobile ad blocking. Because our latest report, released in early 2016, showed that mobile ad blocking is a very real phenomenon. Now, first, nobody was thinking about mobile ad blocking before September of 2015, when Apple announced that in iOS 9, their new operating system, they would introduce support for third parties to write ad blockers for content seen on Apple mobile devices. So that's item one. Item two then is that there are mobile web browsers which block ads by default and have been doing so for several years. So I've just shown you here the icon for a browser called UC Browser. There are various versions of UC, UC Web, UC Browser, UC HD, and so on. These are massively popular in Asia and have been running with ad blocking as default since August 2014, primarily in Asia Pacific. Now in January, Samsung announced that it was going to do something similar to Apple and allow users to install ad blockers on its Galaxy built-in browser. And then finally, Asus in December 2015 announced that it was going to work with AdBlock Plus and would introduce a form of ad blocking. Now, actually, in the event, what happened here is that Apple actually did not have an enormous impact with its content blocker. A small number of people at this point have installed content blockers, far smaller, I think, than the initial hype would have suggested. And Samsung's approach will probably yield reasonably similar results. Asus may actually not launch with AdBlock Plus, it seems. That may not go ahead. So actually the real story here is what's happening with those mobile browsers that have blocking built in by default. And a large number of people, you count them in the hundreds of millions, are using mobile blocking right now that they do not have to install once they've installed the blocker. Another thing that we released in our latest report on mobile blocking was a landscape of mobile ad blocking that introduces several different, let's say, hierarchies. On the one hand, there's ad blocking by the network carrier, by the ISP. This is a very, very powerful style of ad blocking, but legal reasons suggest that this will not be seen in the United States or in Europe anytime soon, some initiatives notwithstanding. And so the example there, the best one, is Digicel in the Caribbean, where over 10 million people are currently subscribed, and they are seeing all ads on their devices blocked by their network operator. Then we announced in the same report that it was now possible for app ads, for ads that appear inside the app, to also be blocked. We've already discussed the various forms of browser blocking, And we also then introduce the idea that there are specific apps which block specific services. So what we have here is a hierarchy of ad blocking, where from the top, the ISP has almost absolute control, provided the device is using the cell network. And at the bottom, you have things like content blockers that are able to block certain things on the device. But what was clear from our figures is that the mobile browser ad blockers are far, far more popular in the Asia Pacific region than they are in the United States and in North America. And you count them in tens of millions in China, in India, and in Indonesia. Now, this phenomenon can easily spread to the West, and there's a reason for that. Opera, for example, a reasonably popular, not the most popular or in the top 3 or 4, but a reasonably popular browser in the West, has just implemented ad blocking as an opt-in option. So this is an image of the new installation screen you get when you install Opera. And as you see more web browsers building in ad blocking, it becomes clear that this is a Me Too feature that all mobile web browsers have to include. The second thing to talk about, and I already teased it, was this revelation that in-app ads are no longer immune from blocking. Now I'll show you some of the testing that we used to determine if this was the case. We took a number, and you can see them, the sample we used on the top of the screen, a number of in-app blockers, and used them against different types of apps. And you can see that Spotify, Apple News, CNN, BuzzFeed, etc. The ads in all of those are blockable. So what this is showing us is that although the numbers in the West are currently small, this is very evocative to us of what we were saying back in 2013 and 2014, that this is a warning that this phenomenon is about to go mainstream in the coming years. We have not yet coordinated our data for desktop and for mobile browser ad blocking. But Mary Meeker of Kleiner Perkins, in her latest Internet Trends report, took our various data and produced this chart of an overall picture of what's happening with ad blocking. So that's the bad news. Let me take you through the good news. First, the good news is that ad serving technology that cannot be circumvented by ad blockers is on the market. PageFair is a leader in this space, and we have competitors who claim similar capabilities. What that means is that this image of the blocked web is the wrong image, the image of an arid wasteland where no ads can be shown. And when we think of the blocked web, we see a totally different image. It's a pristine, virginal landscape waiting for renewal. This is the web as it was back in 1995, at the beginning of the commercial web. It's a web with no ads on it at present, and where we can now decide what ads to show on it. So in a sense, we have a momentous one-time do-over where we can correct the mistakes of the last 20 years. Now, we've asked ad blockers what formats of ad they are willing to tolerate. And what we see is that 61% of ad block users are happy to tolerate video skippable pre-roll, and higher numbers, 67%, are happy with text and picture ads that are still, that don't jump around the page, that don't play audio, and so on without being asked. So essentially, ad blockers are willing to view certain ads. They're willing to view video, picture, and text. And think about what ad blockers are. Now, the normal web is entirely affected by attention deficit. But with the blocked web, the status quo, where there are too many ads and too little attention, is entirely reversed. There is abundant attention and a scarcity of advertising. The other characteristic of the blocked web is that its users are different. An ad block user is a person with plenty of attention, ads are scarce, and also this user is definitely human. They are not an ad fraud bot. Whereas on the normal web, a normal person is someone who has scarce attention, the ads are overabundant, and that person could even be a bot. So it is time for us to start thinking about the blocked web. The blocked web is steadily growing as the normal web shrinks. And it is a space that doesn't have the clutter and the ad fraud of the normal web. In a sense, it's a new premium space that publishers can recapture. Now, on the one hand, advertisers and publishers can address the normal web with entirely routine operations. They do not need to change what they're currently doing. On the blocked web, however, there's an opportunity to find new value. And to understand how to do that, PageFair has been running global stakeholder roundtables. The first was in late 2015 at the Financial Times. Then we moved to Mozilla in London, and the most recent was in April at the headquarters of MEC in New York. And we involved people like the World Association of Newspapers, the 4As, Digital Content Next, the World Economic Forum, the European Commission, the Open Rights Group, the EFF, a big cross-section of stakeholders, different stakeholders at each meeting. And what we gleaned from this were a few ideas about how to turn this phenomenon around and better use the blocked web. So I want to share some of those ideas. The first is that on the blocked web, the user should be given immediate tools for feedback, the ability to close the ad, and maybe the publisher then decides that means the user is moved away from the site, but the ability to respond to the ad and to say whether it's good or bad. The second idea is that on the blocked web, we should limit the quantity of inventory that appears upon it, and that by limiting the quantity of inventory that appears in the blocked web, we necessarily make it a premium space, because an advertiser can cut through the clutter and doesn't have to shout over other advertisers. This allows them to have a premium type of advertising that they would not be able to get anywhere else on the web and would normally have to go to a magazine or to a TV advertiser for. And as a follow-on to that idea, think about how we currently use the web in terms of the marketing funnel. Most normal web users are shown ads that relate to the bottom of the marketing funnel. And adblock users are rebelling against this. And when we show them ads using our technology that can show ads to people who block ads, we have the opportunity to show them only premium inventory in scarcer quantities that works for the top of the funnel. Now, a lot of these users are largely cookieless. You lose some of the tracking that you have on the normal web because it is simply blocked. And there's a question about whether actually this is a positive thing. Instead of working hard to try and restore that tracking, why not rely on the context of the content that the user is actually viewing? So this is what you would do in TV and in magazine advertising. You would use adjacency. And is there a reason not to use it on the web? Now we know that for us, for our product, we can work with programmatic, but there's a big question about whether it is a good idea to restore all of the tracking functionality that might infringe on a user's personal rights, depending on the consent that has been opted into, and actually that might take away from the value of the ad if it can rely on context, which is a powerful thing. Now, what these ideas suggest is that there is an understanding of how to address consumers and readers and viewers that worked for TV and ink and radio and outdoor advertising. And maybe it is time after 2 decades for that proven wisdom to start to return to digital. And before I finish, I want to talk about 2 bad ideas that we know from testing to be wrong. The first bad idea I want to talk about is the ad block wall. The ad block wall is where you ask someone to switch off their ad blocker, and only then will you allow them access your content. Now, the problem is that when publishers do this, they must be certain that they have content that is utterly exclusive and that the user cannot get elsewhere. For those publishers, this is perhaps a sound strategy. But for everyone else, the problem is that the user can get the content which is behind the wall on any other site. And so the ad block wall means that not only is the user being asked not to opt out of the present advertising that they may be unhappy with, but they are also being pushed away from the publisher's site and to another publisher's site. So this to me seems to be a terribly short-sighted idea. It may be that publishers are able to get some degree of opt-in from ad block users for a period of time, but eventually the ad block wall strategy I think is a failing one for publishers who do not have utterly exclusive and very expensive premium content that is not available elsewhere. And bad idea two, I think, would be to repeat the mistake that has created the ad blocking problem. And the mistake that created the ad blocking problem is the current generation of ads, which might jump around the screen, which might behave in ways that surprise users, which might obstruct the content, which might snoop on their data. And so what we're telling advertisers here is you should not try to serve meat to vegetarians. You can, and is right to, show ads to people who have installed blockers. But you should show ads that solve the problems that blockers are citing: consumer privacy, UX, and security. Instead of just reinserting bad ads, it is important to take an approach that actually improves the advertising experience. So at PageFair, we have a few different ways of doing that. The first is we do not serve active JavaScript inside the ad creative. We simply don't do that. And that it entirely negates a whole host of security problems facing the user. The second is, and I think this is a good idea even for our competitors to think about doing, the second is for us to optimize, as we do, the ad creative so that it loads far faster. And third, we are very careful around user privacy, and we maintain high standards that keep users happy. So instead of reinsertion, what we're describing here is reinvention. And this relates again to those two distinct parts of the web. One is for routine operations, advertising as we currently practice it. And the other, we suggest, is a premium space for finding new types of higher value with less inventory and with more of a magazine feel to the advertising. So let me summarize. First point is that it is publishers who are feeling the pain. The consumer pain, however, is very real too. Consumers have many, many reasons to block ads, and we have to address them. The third point is that ads can be shown on the blocked web. PageFair can do this. It is doing it right now. But reinserting ads without fixing the consumer issues is a bad idea. And we think for most publishers, ad block walls are also a bad idea. And the final point is that ad blocking has created a new premium space, the blocked web, where we can find new value across the industry. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. My email address is johnny@pagefair.com. It'd be great to hear your questions.
For those of you online, we're going to continue our break for another 5 to 6 minutes. So please hang in there. And for those of you breaking, continue breaking.
Check.
Started in another minute or two. So if grab your last drinks, food, find your seats. Thanks. Yeah. Okay. All right, and I should be here. All right, we're gonna get started again. As you can tell by my laser and gray hair, I was not one of the people that raised my hand and had an ad blocker because I was too old to know how to turn it on. But and I don't have my human shirt, so you'll have to decide whether I'm actually acting human or being human, which is something I never thought I'd have to worry about. I'm Mark Rappin. I'm the head of partnerships at the ARF. I'm very glad you all joined us and the folks online as well. I hope the folks here in the room are refueled and re-energized, because now that we've sort of set the stage with those presentations, we're going to start with a panel, but then we're going to turn it over to you, because we really want to know, what you're looking for and how we can make a difference. How we can make a difference by giving you information that you could bring to your desk tomorrow. And we'd like to hear from you from what difference you think the ARF could continue to make, and if any, should we be doing original research or just having forums like this? What should our role be as we go forward? With that, I want to start to introduce our panel. I'll introduce our moderator, David Cole. Thanks, David. After 25 years of, and this is what it says, of big company consulting in the media and entertainment world for Ernst & Young and others, David launched Morgan Digital Ventures, helping media, marketing, and entertainment organizations. I might also say helping nonprofit industry advertising research foundation organizations. David's been a great help and a great friend to the ARF. So let's give David a little bit of applause, and David will introduce the rest of our panel.
Big company, eh? Thanks, everyone. Before I introduce these experts next to me, I want to thank the speakers earlier today. I want to thank them because they illuminated for me something that's been going on now for a few years, which is a growing distrust in the marketplace, a growing distrust in the business-to-business side of the marketplace between the supply chain of marketers and agencies and technology and publishers, and a growing problem of distrust that's coming out in consumers. I always learn something when I go to these events, despite how much I try to study and read and listen. What disturbed me about this earlier portion of our event, though, is that we're hearing this story of distrust a lot. We're hearing it over and over again. In fact, I've probably been to a dozen or so conferences where this has been the message. And it's nice to hear a state of the state, but frankly, I don't want to hear it anymore. And it's not that I don't want to listen to it, it's that I want it to change. And I think, maybe by a quick show of hands in this room, is there folks in this room who would also like to hear a better story at the next one of these events when it comes to trust? Okay, for those on the webcast, that was just about everybody in the room. And so we heard today a bit of a state of the state, and what I want to do for the second half of our afternoon is talk about what we need to do so that we're not listening to the same conversation a year from now. How are we going to regain the trust in the digital advertising supply chain between the businesses that are suppliers and demand for inventory? And how are we going to reverse this trend in blocking, that is, the consumer's reaction to the problems, to the disarray of the internet? And so I'm proud to have four panelists with me. Immediately to my right, we have Chris Langle coming from Moat in New York. Thanks for the cross-country flight. Representing the Pacific Northwest, if I have that right, from Seattle's John Kleiman from Rubicon Project. So thanks for the southerly flying. Okay. While we're talking about West Coast, Lauren Morris comes from Distillery down in Los Angeles. And nice of you to come up to San Francisco. Thank you. And also from New York, another cross-country flyer, Joe Barone, Group M. Thanks for joining us. And I too am from New York, so I appreciate this beautiful weather here on the West Coast. We're currently in the humidity and heat dome in New York. So thank you, Quadcast, for having us in this part of the country. So here's how I'd like to do this, and then I'm going to be quiet and let my panel take it away. I think we heard categorically two things. We heard that there's a B2B trust problem, and we heard it rearing its ugly head in fraud and a bit on measurement and viewability. And then we also heard about the consumer side, about ad blocking, and I want to tackle those in order. We'll start business to business. And what I want to do with this panel is talk about how we're going to make this change towards more trust. Think of it like the 12-step program. You know, we all got to go for a little therapy, and I don't know if we'll come up with 12 steps, but hopefully we'll walk out of here with 2 or 3 that we can begin to activate when we get back to our offices. Okay? And so with that, I want to start way on my end with Joe as representing the brands, the buyers. And I want to challenge you a bit.
You're all fired.
Yeah. I want to challenge Joe to start us off on this trust problem on the B2B side and put the lens on from the buyer whose money is flowing into this ecosystem and as we heard
Sure.
this morning, being taken away.
Sure, thanks. Interesting part of the discussion is trust, key part of the discussion for both companies and consumers. And I think our approach has always been transparency. When we started working with verification companies in 2010, we started having meetings with clients about fraud and brand safety. And then by 2011, viewability. We call those meetings, you mean to tell me meetings. Because the client would say, you mean to tell me that half of everything I'm doing in digital has never been seen? And those were very difficult meetings. We also had some meetings where the client said, well, can you tell me exactly how much the publishers owe us back? And can you go get that money? And those were even more difficult discussions because, of course, the answer was no. We haven't had this data until now. So we can't get your money back. So bringing our clients into the conversation early, and we've all seen the research that say CMOs feel unempowered, CMOs feel confused, but that is changing. And most of the CMOs we deal with are actually quite empowered and very, very knowledgeable about the issue. And we feel like we've been part of that, and events like this are part of that. So the first thing the first part of our approach has always been to be completely transparent with our clients about what we believe is going on.
And I'm going to turn it over right here. When you guys talk to your clients, now Joe Group has been in the press about things like 100% viewability and buying human traffic. I want to tee it up with you, but then I want to turn over to Moat. Tell me a little bit about your positioning on human viewable traffic and your clients' positioning on buying that kind of traffic.
Our clients don't believe that they should pay for things that didn't happen. And an ad that is not seen can't possibly have an impact on a customer journey or a conversion. It's honestly that simple. Everything else about our position in the marketplace stems from the fact that we'll sit in a conference room with a client and say, do you want to pay for something that didn't happen? And everything we do, all the partners we work with, all the exploring of new ideas that we pursue is in order to do a better job of describing and defining whether or not an event really took place.
So for those of you that aren't familiar, Mode is an analytics and measurement company, and we like to focus on attention, which we would hope would happen after we get past human and viewable, to allow folks to look at, how is an ad being interacted with, how much time was spent with it, some metrics that can really get to the core of success. But that kind of has to start with human and viewable, and it's hard to argue the other side of that, I guess. And so that's the kind of, I guess, step one to the rehabilitation program is agreeing that that's the starting point, and then from there, I think lots of other things can start to be looked at.
So can I argue the other side of human viewable a little bit? So I don't want to argue the other side of human, of course. There's absolutely no reason that people should be paying for significant amounts of invalid traffic, of non-human traffic. That said, I think it's interesting. We at Rubicon Project, of course, we are a platform, an exchange. We work with a variety of different buyers and sellers. And we do find that there are classes of buyers, for example, certain types of direct response advertisers may be perfectly happy to go after impressions that have, say, are below the fold on a page where somebody might not scroll down or they might scroll down. They may get 50%, 30%, 20% viewability on that unit if you're looking at kind of at an aggregate level. But they say if the CPM is right and I can get my conversions out of that I want to get, I'm okay with something that isn't viewable on every impression. So obviously a different class of marketer in that case. But I think there are scenarios. Transparency, I completely agree, is crucial. But I also don't feel like we necessarily need to be moving towards a world where all transactions are performed purely on the basis of viewable impressions, because there are legitimate business cases for going otherwise.
That's not true at all. Sorry, just to go a little further. I don't know if this is what we really want to talk about today, but there's so many fallacies in that line of thinking. and it rewards bad behavior. It rewards laziness, and it also rewards marketing models that do the best they can to screw our clients. It's just not the right way to think about it. If you're buying on CPA and you're getting the ROI you want, God bless you. If you're buying on CPM, the things that didn't happen did not happen. And if we pay for inventory that's non-viewable, we're paying data costs, we're paying ad serving costs, we're paying data storage costs, we're paying analytics costs. The total loaded cost of those non-actions far outweigh the benefit in ROI of a model at 30% viewability. You're not looking at it that way, John. I totally understand that. But if you really load the cost, that client would look at it. And we have clients that 5 years ago thought exactly what you're saying, and they don't believe that anymore. We have clients that optimize to pizzas out the door, right? And they don't buy that way.
I'm actually with you. Sorry. I'll shake your hand again, Joe. It's fine. It's more about the definition that we're using and for success. And viewability is very important in terms of transparency. But if you use viewability as your only metric for success on campaigns, particularly in programmatic, then you may not be hitting that audience anyhow. So I'm all for a more holistic approach and a way to measure what you're really looking for. You're not looking for CTR. You're not looking for viewability. You're looking for some sort of engagement. And I agree that we don't always have those definitions, but to rely on 100% viewability only, it's not doable.
So yeah, I completely agree, Lauren, and I think Joe would agree that you don't want to have just 100% viewability as your metric. In fact, that's what kind of I think the key is to go beyond. If I think Harrison had the slide up right of eMarketer with all the ads on the page, and if all you're doing is 100% viewability, then that's what we're going to end up with, right? We're going to end up with people that try to game the system and throw tons of half filled ads or 100% of the pixels ads for a split second to get that inventory. But if you're really able to layer on more intricate and transparent and granular, which I think you said is also important, metrics to see each placement down to the creative level, how it was interacted with, how much time was spent with it, then I think you use human and viewable as a starting point, but go much beyond that to make sure that that's not the only thing you're looking at. If there was one easy silver bullet, we wouldn't be here 5 years later after defining what a viewable impression was, right? And we'd all be at a bar right now.
So I want to do a little bit of make sure I understood everything that was said here. And thanks for taking off the gloves, guys. It makes it much more interesting. So I think we all agreed that human is that's the lowest low watermark of acceptability. We must be transacting on human impressions, and we need to continue to use all the sophisticated tools we can in order to ensure that when an ad is served, it is served to a human, and if for some reason it gets served to a non-human, nobody's paying for that. Do I have that right? We good with that? No gloves? Okay. Michael Tiffany, I think you like that, right? Okay. The thing we're hearing, though, is this notion of viewable. And I want to maybe throw a little bit of a twist on the terminology for a second. I think what I'm hearing is no argument that a brand whose goal is based on people seeing the ad should have the right to pay only for that which is seen. But I think, John, I heard you say that there are other kinds of advertising transactions that aren't predicated on the ad being seen. It might be a cost per click. A used example of a DR, direct response, where the payment is made not on the ad being viewable, but an action being taken on the ad, which should presumably mean that somebody saw it to take an action, unless they're clicking that mouse below the screen. I've never seen how that's done. Am I hearing that right? I mean, is that what you were trying to communicate?
I think so. Yeah, I think I would tend to argue, and it may be that I'm wrong. I'm willing to be told that I'm wrong and to be educated. But I'm also I think there are certainly if someone wants to pay for a particular standard of viewability, there's every reason to support that. But I think I believe there are scenarios where that may not be the important criterion. But again, that's my impression based on some of the conversations I've had. I could be mistaken about that. The world could be changing.
I don't think it's right and wrong. I think it's just a different philosophy.
So maybe to Joe, to your point about all the additional costs associated with serving a non-viewable ad, I think the sort of our beginning of our 12-step program here, guys, is I think we all agree about human and viewable, and our definition of viewable has to be based on the advertiser's goals. The problem statement here, though, is that there are costs to serving an ad below the fold. And so maybe one of the things that we should put on our list in the 12-step program is to improve the technology such that the advertising itself gets served, or the costs involved in delivering that ad get served in to be aligned with the goals of the brand who's serving that ad. If it's an ad that requires a view, then perhaps part of our fixing this human viewable problem is to reduce the likelihood that the ad ever even kicks off all those costs to serve it, unless it's an ad that's a CPC or click ad. Can I put that on the 12-step program? All right, we're getting some provisional agreement to that one. As long as it's not ultimately clicked through. Right, if it's clicked through, Lauren, so for those of you on the phone and the video, Lauren said, as long as it's not clicked through, and I think even Joe, you would agree, if it's a DR spot where the only payment occurs when it's clicked through, then assuming it's clicked through, then the full cost would be incurred.
You can talk about a viewable buying model, or you can talk about other types of buying models. The problem is when you conflate and integrate those. If you're buying on an action like a completed view, which very often cost per view really means cost per play, doesn't really mean cost per view. But if you're paying on an action, you're paying on an action.
So let's put this one on the list, right? We're gonna get smarter about human viewable, but we're also going to recognize that not all transactions need to be viewable because they're not being paid for on a viewability basis. They're being paid for on another model, like a click basis.
Just one thing you have to be careful about. A lot of these metrics can be put in fraud. They're gamed. We can game the system toward these. We can game the system toward viewability. We can game the system toward click-through. So we have to be very careful about putting this on the 12th step and saying that's the answer. You really have to get to the core. Did an action happen that a human takes? Because Michael said it, a couple others said it. Bots are getting more sophisticated. The fraudsters are getting more sophisticated. What is it that humans do that is going to cost too much for our fraudsters to duplicate? And if we can get to that measurement, that's going to help us all.
Lauren, you teed up. Keep the mic because you're on next. You teed us up actually for the next section of the 12-step program, which is measurement generally. And I think it didn't come up so much today. I was actually looking for more on this. So we'll tee it up right now in the room, which is that in many cases we've taken internet measurement and sort of aligned it with things we're really comfortable with and familiar with in other media like print or TV. And Lauren, I think you touched on it, that maybe it's time we rethink some of that, partly to relate better the value of the transaction to an outcome that we all care about, and also partly to remove some of the incentive for the bad behaviors that have gotten us to this moment. Maybe you could elaborate a little bit on your thinking on that.
I think it comes down to economics. If you think about how the internet started and nobody really knew how to monetize it, and we all started using it, we've got this mixed model of eyeballs versus subscription and other, and we've created these metrics that have just kept us going. I mean, Conrad and I have been in this space for a very long time, measuring the internet and web traffic, and we're trying to figure out what is that metric, what does it mean? What it really comes down to, what does the brand want, right? So you think about the internet and digital creating its own channel, and then we're kind of bringing it back to the consumer, who, those of you who have been in advertising and marketing for a long time on the traditional side, have always been looking for, what is the consumer going to do? What do I need to get for the consumer, for the brand studies and whatnot? We think that just because it's digital and big data, that we've got solutions, that we've got these signal that actually allows us to answer things. No, we've all created proxies. So yes, it's trying to get to more offline information. Did a purchase actually get made, or did somebody actually engage with the content, or any engagement that the brand wants that means that they've got more people who care about their brand.
So we're focusing the metrics on outcomes that matter. Okay.
Yes.
I'm going to give this is going to be a hard one for Rubicon in a programmatic environment. How the world is moving much more towards programmatic, which is obviously very good for businesses like yours. But how can we satisfy the desire of the programmatic marketplace with metrics that go beyond impressions, views, clicks, etc.?
Yeah, so I'm not sure I have a perfect answer to that today. I know, disappointing, huh? So, our position as a platform is typically that, one, we're going to provide a high quality, trustworthy marketplace that's as clean and free of issues like bots and non-human traffic as we can. And secondly, that we'll provide a platform or an opportunity for buyers and sellers to agree on whatever metrics they happen to think are relevant. So we're not necessarily saying we have a Rubicon project answer for how you should measure viewability or engagement, but we will say we will work with the various different firms that engage in those kind of measurements to enable to lubricate those sort of transactions between the buyers and sellers using the metrics that are important to them. So that's traditionally been our approach to that, is to provide the marketplace and facilitate that rather than to try to dictate.
I don't think this is just a programmatic issue. I mean, for Distillery, we're also a platform. We take supply from Rubicon. We'll measure with Moat. We'll use any third party that's going to help us serve the customer in the long run. We still have the economics of our system who are looking for CTRs or view through or something that's not really for two reasons. One is their business is built off of that, or we're not able to get to that data yet. We still, as much technological advances that we've made, it's still difficult to get to measurement for mobile and doing cross device, right? Let alone getting to the offline side. So I don't think it's a programmatic issue. It's our general advertising issue, and how do you get to that result? And eventually it gets better, but then we get more fragmented as the channels start. So then we start using proxies. I don't think there's an answer. It's just a recognition that there's no Pareto optimal, metric or piece of data out there. It's understanding that we're going to keep evolving and we're going to get closer to it, but then it's going to get a little bit further away.
Joe, what do your clients want? Like, what's going to make them
everything for free?
Okay. All right. That's not on the.
I kid my clients.
That's not on the 12-step program. That was step 0. Seriously though, like we've beat to death this notion of what's the impression and a view, and it's devalued more and more because of all this naughty stuff happening in measurement. What are your clients would say, if you gave me that, man, I would spend a boatload of money?
Our best clients want to keep exploring, want to keep pushing the envelope, and want accountability at the same time. They don't want to retreat to a safe haven where, basically the less you do in digital, the safer you're going to be. Right now, I mean, that's the reality. If you only buy direct with premium publishers, homepage takeovers, you're going to have pretty clean inventory. You're going to miss a lot of consumers. You're going to miss the opportunity to provide a lot of messages. You're going to miss the opportunity to be relevant in a lot of environments that aren't very trackable right now, but you'll be relatively safe. So there's that balance between safety and engagement. And what we do as consultants is help them walk that line. And every client has a completely different threshold of what they're willing to accept. And even within a client, they might have different divisions or different products, like they would with brand safety guidelines. They might have very different sort of threat thresholds. That's the right way to say it.
I think that's good.
So I think, in a nutshell, that is what they want. They want the new ideas. They want to explore. They want to be ahead of their competitors. They want to be doing better than whoever they see as their number one competitor. And they want as much safety as they can possibly get.
So I'm hearing safety, transparency, which you said before, and I'm hearing the ability to innovate and try new models, experiment until they find what's going to work. And each brand may have a different set of criteria for what's going to work for them. Now, how does somebody like Moat measure that stuff?
Yeah, I think the key is to be at the impression level, to be granular and be transparent. And I think what Joe is kind of uncovering for us is the clients want to move into digital, right? Every report out there says time spent on TV is going down, time spent on digital's going up. The younger you get, the more stark that hockey stick is towards digital. But the TV upfronts were up this year. There's has to be a reason why, and it might be because the clients sometimes walk away from events feeling like 50% of the ads aren't viewable, 35% are blocked, and 30% are fraudulent, right? So I think having metrics that go well beyond just viewability, as we've all said, and really say, did somebody watch the video? Did they watch it with the volume on? Did they watch it 50% of the way through, 100% of the way through? Or did they hit play, see it say one of two ads, go check their email and come back 60 seconds later? So those are the kind of metrics that, will allow somebody to start to dig into. And for a brand, maybe they know that they reveal their brand in that video at the 11-second mark. So being able to know, was someone engaged with my ad at that time when the breakfast, cereal eating stopped and the ad was revealed or the brand was revealed? Those are the kind of metrics that I think would highlight going deeper and getting a little more granular than just a checkbox of was it viewable.
Okay, I think I have number 2 on the 12-step program. We have 10 to go.
Way to go.
Yeah. So number 1 was we all agreed in human, and we agreed that it's not necessarily human and viewable, but it's human and whatever the client's economic metric is, that's the floor. It has to be based on that economic metric. The second thing I'm hearing is that we need to have a much more diverse set of measurement capabilities that measure outcomes that matter to the brands that are spending the money. And those outcomes could be, as you just said, it could be, I need to know whether they played the 11th second of the ad, or it could be an outcome like somebody bought the product. Okay, so that's number 2, is this measurement granularity. I want to flip a little bit, and we're like accelerating. We skipped like 3 through 9. See,
look at the relief on the
I know, look at the
faces.
relief in the room. We're up to number 10 out of the 12-step program. I want to move just a little bit and talk about the interaction between everything we just talked about and the consumer experience, because we heard this morning from ComScore that linkage, and then it was reinforced later with the other speakers. So the consumer is experiencing an equal dissatisfaction with the digital supply chain right now. And some of the things we saw in studies released by the IAB this week have to do with clutter, with creativity. We saw Google talk about speed and latency. So I want to, again, flip it to you guys. How do we actually change that? Especially considering the yin and yang here, right? The yin being a publisher trying to monetize that inventory and have more opportunities for monetization, and the brand wanting to get in front of more eyeballs, but the consumer wanting to experience the web ad-free entirely. And I'll just throw it out. Who wants to be the first on this one? Oh, again, Rubicon. He's really excited.
I think, the first step of a traditional 12-step program, as I understand it, is admit you have a problem, right? So I think we need to start as an industry. Everyone needs to acknowledge that we have not historically done a good enough job, buy side, sell side, everywhere, of putting the consumer in the picture. Sellers, load more ad units onto pages without considering the impacts. Buyers will, marketers will create ad units that they've got to know on some deep unconscious level will be disruptive to the experience, but they do it anyway because it's in their interest to do so. I think it was Michael who mentioned the tragedy of the commons, right? So I think part of it is we simply have to remember there are 3 parties that have to be satisfied in all these transactions if we're going to build long-term value in the industry. There are the buyers, there are the sellers, and there are the consumers. And we really have not done a good job as an industry of focusing on the consumers. So I'd say part of it is starting with changing our mindset. before we even get into tactics.
You're probably talking about my thinking on creative. Yeah.
Exactly what I was
Okay. I don't know because I sent it to you. I think that I try to think about what I do, right? And I'm on my devices all day long, usually my mobile phone. And much as we saw earlier this morning, if you're interrupted with something, and particularly, usually it's I'm trying to get to a meeting, I can't figure out the address, I just put in maps, I just got some blocker or interstitial. And I'm like, are you kidding me? I hate you. I hate you so much. Now I should use an ad blocker. I'm from the age that information. I'm in the information age, so the fact that it's available now, I'm so thrilled about that I don't want to block it. But for us as an industry, with the data, and I come from the data side, as you can probably tell, we have more and more data that allow us to do better with the creative that we have. But we still have thresholds in technology and whatnot to get over, particularly in the programmatic side, because we basically took that flashing banner ad and placed it over on mobile and said that works. But we said that that small little 320 by 50 is going to actually engage with you. We don't really think about it. We're repeating things. We're not saying, hey, what's the format? And if we're going to use a particular format, what's actually the copy and the creative? I mean, how many of you guys have experiences with the brands that you've been loyal to for 20 plus years, and they're still treating you like somebody off the street? Right, exactly. There's a couple of hands raised, and that's what we need to fix. It's not an easy solution.
Okay, so I heard two things. I heard one, we clearly, Rubicon, you've talked about the importance of the three parties and creating that better experience. And Lauren, you were a little more specific about creating that better experience by having the right kind of advertising, the right creative, the right experience for the consumer, and using tools to create that experience. So you guys on the buy side have clients who have to pay for all those different experiences. I know you're mostly in the media business, but if you think about the creative business for a minute, it's really expensive to produce separate ads for every platform, have different creative components that might build in order to have the right consumer experience. I mean, is that feasible?
Well, it's absolutely feasible because nature abhors a vacuum, and there's a cottage industry that has been created that does nothing but flash to HTML conversion, videos for Facebook, and dynamic customization versions for DCO buys. So there'll always be somebody who does it. The main creative agency, they don't want to do it. Here's a 30, maybe I'll give you 15. We're done. We're out. That's for sure. When we've been very engaged with the IAB, and we're trying to get WPP creative agencies to attend ad blocking working group sessions. Good luck, right? It just doesn't happen. And so everything you're saying is absolutely true, and it's hard to get any interesting debate on a panel like this on ad blocking because we are really all in this together, and it's all of our problem to fix. But sometimes I like to think of it, and I'm not a creative guy at all, so you tell me what you think about this. But what if you gave the brief to the creatives? Imagine everybody had an ad blocker, blank piece of paper and a pencil. What do you do? Right? Because if you look at some of these numbers, and actually the penetration rate is actually declining. And there's some positive signs that things that are happening like ad light experiences are actually reversing the trend of the growth of ad blocking. But what if you imagined a world where you couldn't run plain old banners? Then what would you do? And maybe that's not a bad exercise to think about. Just let's stop doing for a day. Let's stop doing all the things we do that are annoying. What would you do? Right now, unfortunately,
Could you tell that to my kids?
Now, part of the problem with that is you're going to outlaw some people's business models, right? And the lean guidelines are going to outlaw some people's business models. And I won't name the companies here, but there's a couple off the top of my head that if everyone in this room, the companies they work for, adopted the lean guidelines, there are companies that would literally go out of business, or they would adapt because they would start with that blank piece of paper and figure out a different way to do it.
That's really, I like that. I like that a lot. Let me ask a question around. So we talked a little bit about the creative itself, but now I want to mix a little bit with the data and the creative. So just by show of hands, how many of you visited, I don't know, let's call it Amazon to go find something, and then you go buy it, and then you get an ad for that thing that you just bought? Okay, and how many find that mildly annoying? Okay, how many find it really annoying? Okay, for those again on the phone, it was a unanimous vote that it was either mildly or really annoying. Okay, so here's an example where so far I've heard maybe it's step 10 is we've got to have better creative, and Joe, you rightfully pointed out there's an industry in creating better creative. But I'd like to couple it. I'd like to get your reaction, and I'll go back to the programmatic people here. I'd like to get your reaction, and John, I'll start with you on the data, applying the data better so that not only do we serve more relevant and more creatively interesting ads, but we also do a better job at getting rid of the ones that are no longer relevant because we figured it out. Might be a tough question, but I'm throwing it out to you.
I can't say that I know the solution to that. I completely agree. It's a problem. I mean, my personal example is having gotten ads for a hotel and then sitting 3 days later in the lobby of that hotel on that hotel's Wi-Fi getting, continued ads saying, please come to our hotel, right? But how do you solve that? I don't claim to have an answer to that one off the top of my head. So I'm gonna run back a few yards and punt. Yeah.
So less from a data fueling retargeting, but just from a measurement standpoint, I think you can look at the different areas of advertising. Facebook is a great example. Measuring an ad on Facebook uncovers the fact that probably nowhere else is creative more important, right? You're choosing to stop in the news feed and interact with something, and in fact choosing to turn on the volume if you want to listen to it. So I think thinking about it from a measurement standpoint, and then maybe working closely as an industry to develop those. I think Harrison had something up about sticky ads, right? And that people don't mind sticky ads that much in mobile. Well, Facebook could probably become the largest advertiser ever in the history of anything, or publisher, if they put a sticky ad on the bottom of the news feed, right? They would have more inventory than anyone could ever dream of. But they've chosen to say that that's probably not the experience they want. And so instead, it puts a real importance on that news feed and interacting with an ad versus in the desktop experience where it's likely just where's the ad position next to the content and was it above the fold or how low, how long's the latency. So I think you can learn from that. And again, it goes back to there's no silver bullet, but then it's working closely together to say, okay, this is a unique type of kind of creative opportunity. What if all ads were blocked? How would we react to this? So I think there is a value self-servingly in measuring, of course, but then in working together based on the different formats of it.
You can use data to figure out which creative goes with which audiences, and you can do that with the programmatic data. It's something that we have done. We've done it with a few brands. It's a small scale solution for them to do an evergreen, to test their display as it's going through, what's working, what's not, how to change the copy, how to build specific creative-based models, very small scale. In addition to that, you've got to have the right audience targeting, right? It can't just be a retarget. I went to that page, and so therefore, because I went to that page, I'm in market. No, either I'm a client and you have that information, or I'm a prospect. And you better make sure that you're putting me in a prospect threshold before you serve me an ad. So these are the things that can be done. We don't do it though because we're not all the economics aren't always there, right? We're not getting paid a lot of money for CPMs. We've got this. I love what Michael was saying about the whole fraud, little gap that's being covered. If we could capture that, think about how, of course, our marketers wouldn't like it. I understand that. But we need to change the way we think about this medium. That's all part of it, and use the data.
So I think we have 10 and 11 covered. Let me recap step 10 and step 11. I already forgot 1 and 2, but we'll come back to them later. 10 was, yeah, oh yeah, that's right. Roll the tape. 10 was better ad creative that is optimized for the device, for the experience, and less intrusive. So it's I don't mean literally the unit, but the creative experience for the consumer. And the second was using data more holistically in order to put the right message in front of the right consumer and not put the wrong message. And we all know the buying example. Wait, we have a question for the audience that wants to come in. Wait, you have to come up here because we don't have a mic out there. I'm gonna do this, but I'm not quite ready to invite everybody up. But go ahead and face the people on and their TVs at home in their living rooms.
So 25% people have installed ad blocking software. That's why we're here. It's disrupting the revenue model. We said earlier that the end user is really important because they're disrupting, they're turning everything off. 99% of the conversation has been about what people want to sell me, what the ad looks like, what this looks like. And I still come back to, and you know this from earlier discussions, that fundamentally you have to ask people or let them opt in, what do I want? And when you ask them what they want, like at Home Depot, when we work with them, 12 to 15% of our messages convert. And if you continue down the path of thinking of all the infrastructure and all this, and not think about the end result and the consumer, you're going to get 100% of the people downloading ad blocking software, and the industry won't be around. I fundamentally think when you empower the consumer, you're going to be rich beyond your wildest dreams because they opt in and they tell you what they want. And if they're not opting in, then I agree. Why would you want to pay for something that I'm not interested in? Stop sending me stuff that I'm not interested in. Stop disrupting my experience on things I'm not interested in. I'm obviously not an advertiser, but I'd like to have someone talk more about you're getting disrupted. It's in a mega way, and you've spent 1% of the conversation on the people that are turning you off. Like that it's illogical. It doesn't make any sense to me.
So I love the notion of the opt-in, but I mean, I'm going to ask the panel. I think that's a behavior that has a use case, but the rest of the advertising and content ecosystem, I think would be challenged. I want to hear a little bit from the panelists.
You feed that opt-in now into other systems. Now you're a lot smarter. You're guessing what I want. Tracking the old supply rod. Now you know. Hey, he's in the supply.
But are you saying then that we no longer have an advertising-based monetization system in the internet?
I'm saying I believe that there's an advertising model, but you have to think about. I'm saying you need to enhance it. Right now, everything's a guess, or you're blasting me with
That's
stuff.
what we're talking about in terms of the data. I mean, the fact is that there's data and technology out there that aren't being used to allow you to have a better conversation with the consumer. I agree with you that if I'm being targeted or interrupted in a way that's disrupting me, then I'm going to put up an ad blocker, or my clients' customers are going to put up an ad blocker. But the whole idea is to figure out what allows us to engage with consumers. What's the content? What's the creative? What's the story? What's the way to actually get somebody to pay attention without disrupting? I think there's a nuance there. I don't think any of us are saying that we don't want the consumer to have a better experience, because if the consumer had a better experience, we'd all be better off. We agree with you on that.
Are you perhaps suggesting something that is more of a pull from the consumer rather than a push from the marketer?
Let me I want to go on to the 12th point in the 12-step program. But you let us down a path a little circuitously, but I like where you're going because it has to do with the data itself. Something that wasn't brought up much in this room and we hadn't talked about is that beyond the visual experience of the consumer, there's a tremendous amount of data flying back and forth across the internet. And each time a collector of such data fires a pixel on a page, that also disrupts the consumer experience because it slows down the load time. And probably in this room, many of us understand, but even in the general public, a lot of consumers realize that their private data is flying all over the place. And so whether it's because we've got an opt-in, as Steve from MyAlert said, see, good memory, or from implicitly learning about them, distillery like you guys do, for example, we have a data ecosystem. And I think that I'd like to challenge this group as our last maybe 12th step of the 12-step program. What do we do to reduce the volume, particularly a repetitive volume of data flying back and forth, a lot of which doesn't really get used to enhance that experience to the consumer? Or I'll say it a little simpler. If I experience on a page 10 pixels firing to collect information about me, I better get a value out of that as a consumer. And I'm not today. I'm not seeing it. What's the exchange? What do we have to do to make it clear to the consumer or to reduce the demand on the consumer's data?
Is that just a subset of the larger question about articulating the value exchange, though, between the consumer and the content provider, right? You're getting free or reduced price content in exchange for various things. I mean, I don't dispute that data is a problem, but to me it seems like the second order problem versus the larger question of how do you make the overall experience better. The numbers I've seen indicate that concerns about privacy are pertinent to kind of a relatively small proportion of users that are very sort of savvy and interested in those kind of things, but not kind of a broad-based issue. Now, just to pile on a little bit, though, I will also mention it's not just things like data privacy concerns, right? You see pages where between all the different viewability measures and everything else you've got going on, you've got this tremendous redundancy and overlap just in things like measurement. So, that said, I do think, to me, it's a secondary issue over the question of the overall value exchange.
I agree with that, John. And also to say that the consumer gets no value out of the ad ecosystem in digital is naive. Google Maps, you love it, get you here. How did Google pay for it? Maybe with some YouTube revenue or maybe with some AdWords revenue, right? So the digital ecosystem is 95% supported by advertising, right? So it's not just the money that goes into the pockets of the publishers, it's the money they use to generate content and applications and all the wonderful things that we take for granted, right? We might not have done a good enough job of explaining to consumers the reason your phone lives next to you, and if you were running out of this building with the building on fire, you would come back to get your phone, is because of the money that advertisers pay to content producers to build the content that you get that makes you want that device next to your heart at all times, right? So we're in the communications business. Why should we be good at communicating that?
Yeah, I mean, my personal story is my wife, I guess, is in the minority, although I think the privacy thing gets kind of talked about. I think the average consumer is aware of their kind of personal data because 3 days later they're sitting in the lobby and the ad's coming up, and they're saying, well, obviously they're kind of watching me. But my wife's one of those people who never wanted Apple to know anything about her until the day she got in the car and said, well, now how do I make the GPS work? And it was, well, then you have to give them your information. So I think that that we are talking about users when we talk about kind of what's the creative and how are ads more like content, and what would happen if people were cognizant that they might get an ad blocker installed and they design pages differently or design things differently. I think the latency, I think it's somewhat easy to say, oh, that's because there's lots of measurement going on. I don't think that's actually the case. I think it's probably a lot of other things that publishers choose and other people choose to put on the page. But I think there is something there that you could say, if there's a uniformity in the metrics we're going to report on, in the definitions, if we can come to some agreements on some standards, we can probably start to reduce some of those and have a uniformity in what pixels are firing when, and how heavy they could be, along with how heavy the ads are, to reduce that part of it as well.
Okay, so I think I got the 12th of the 12-step program down then. And I actually think it's not about the tech itself. It's about communicating to the public the value exchange. I think that's what I heard. And I think, Joe, your point was really well taken, that we have, as a community, as publishers and advertisers and technology companies, we have forgotten to remind the audience that consumes an extraordinary amount of great content and uses incredibly utilitous, is that a word? Apps with great utility. Make that up. It's now on TV. That they in fact are participating in an ecosystem that is a give and take. But so 12-step program is the communication, but it's in the context of, I think, what we said was step 10 and 11, which is better creative that's more palatable in that current visual experience, and a better use of data to make sure that we continue to be relevant and continue to be sensitive to not overloading the consumer. So if I had to recap, we didn't do all 12 steps, but I think we got 5 in there. I think we started talking about the business to business side, and currency being human and viewable for that which the metric is a viewable ad, it's an impression, and human and whatever the other metric is, human and clickable, human and actionable, if that's the metric. But we all agreed to human, and we all agreed that the metric has to be what the advertiser wants to pay for. The second thing we talked about is improving measurement for this connected world, having more than just the impression metric, and moving in a direction of measuring the outcomes that the brands and, quite frankly, the publishers can deliver. Those are 1 and 2. Then we skipped 3 through 9, and 10 was, well, just for timing. If I had a couple hours, we'd do it all. We'll be reconvening in the morning for number 3. Right. Then 10 was better creative. 11 was better use of data to keep relevance. And number 12 is better communication about the value exchange that all the participants participate. Did I get that right, guys? Can we start that tomorrow? All right. Thanks very much. That was great. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, so here's what we're going to do to finish up the day, because it's great that we're talking heads and we can all speak to you, but I'd much like to have more engagement like Steve started, where we get Q&A from the audience and even some debate with the audience. So I want to do 2 things. One is I'd like to invite up those that presented this morning, all of you, so that the questions can be directed not just at the latest panel, but those that presented this morning. So if you all come up. We have 2 mics, and because we have lots of folks on the webcast, what I'm going to do is ask if you have a question for you to come up. You'll either speak into the mic or I'll repeat the question. And if it's for a specific person, ask. And if it's for anyone, we'll tee it up and see who wants to answer. Okay, who's going to be the bold first question? Is Steve the only one who came up? We have a volunteer. Come on up. All right, and since there's a camera there, take a mic. Okay, you can talk to your audience and you can ask questions. Introduce yourself first.
Hi, I'm Lacey. I work for an ad agency called the R2C Group. We do a lot of DR. And I guess I have 2 questions, one about fraud, one about viewability. For fraud, being on the agency side, when clients bring this up, they come to us and say, well, what can we do? And generally our only answer is to go to a verification like Moat or the others in the space. But other than that, we can't really do anything about it. So that's my first question. My second question is more about viewability. And being in the DR space, as Rubicon kind of alluded to, some of our clients don't care too much about viewability as long as the bottom line CPA hits the goals. But we do have clients that it is important to, even though their goals are sales goals. And what I really struggle with is just, even though there's a hard definition for viewability, but the way that it's measured is really inconsistent from the different systems. And when something's considered viewable, or when something's a non-viewable impression, does not always mean that it wasn't viewable, because measurability comes into play a lot like that. When I pull campaign reports, I always remind clients when they ask about viewability is that we also need to look at measurability, and it varies just as much. So I guess my question is, where is the industry going in measurement in terms of being more consistent on how we're tracking viewability and other verification metrics?
Wow, those are great. That was great. Great two-part question. So I think I heard two things. I heard question is, what can we do as an agency for human traffic, right? Did I get that? And reducing fraud. And then second was, there's an inconsistency in how viewability is measured, which causes additional confusion. How can we move the needle on that? Did I get that right? Okay. I know I'm going to speak to both mics for a second. I'm going to hand these guys the mics.
All right, you first.
All right. So we'd be happy to set up. I dropped my water again. We'd be happy to set up a kind of trial for an upcoming campaign for one of your clients, and we publish our measurability number in every single one of our reports. So there are certainly things that are difficult to measure in our ecosystem, in app, and certain things that you need to kind of have the right setup to measure. But I think what you would find is actually measuring has gotten to the point where our average is 99% measurability. So the idea that we can't work together to have human and viewable as a baseline and have adequate measurement, I would love to try to change your mind on in terms of measurability. There's probably a second answer on the human side of it, which is harder to measure, as we heard earlier today. But I think from a viewability standpoint, we can all come to an agreement on thresholds and on a measurability rate.
All right. So taking it in order. First of all, taking on fraud. If your ad buys are affected by fraud, it's not an accident. You don't accidentally get a whole bunch of bots showing up to your websites if you're in the publishing business. So sometimes there's a certain amount of unintentional bot traffic when bots want to hit your website just to get cookied or just to blend in the noise. That never accounts for double-digit bot percentages. So if you're exposed to fraud in your ad buys, and almost everyone is exposed to fraud in their ad buys across the course of the year, then someone is goosing the numbers. And so the right way to take it on is with vigilance that involves independent third-party monitoring, but with actions that are aimed at the root cause, which is disincentivizing the people that you're buying from to be fucking with you. And so it's not to be like there's a kind of tacit treatment of fraud as just another performance metric that we can deal with sort of passively and aggressively, which is nonsensical. Like, someone is trying to fuck you and you need to align their interests with you. And that's certainly possible because, again, nobody is accidentally exposing themselves to fraud. They are always working with a third party that they need to stop working with. There is always a concrete action step that involves getting to the root cause of fraud exposure and then ending it, which is something that we professionally do all the time. So it is, we know for sure it's totally achievable. It's not achievable when you treat it as a performance metric to just optimize a way, which then just gets you into this horrible slog of never writing your partner's incentives with you, which is really the proper solution. Now, asking like prognostication about the future of measurement, with particularly with respect to viewability measurement. If you get down into the weeds as to what the actual engineering effort to do viewability measurement is today, it's crazy browser hacks. What everyone does to measure viewability is they insert Flash and JavaScript payloads that force browsers to do nonsensical work to then increase the probability that you can sort of tell if an ad was painted to a display or not, which is just nonsensical. So I think that in the future, what's going to happen is that you're just going to be able to pull the browser. There's going to be a function in HTML5 that says, "Hi, am I viewable or not?" Which also happily makes a whole category of security problem called clickjacking go away. So White Ops and some others, now Google and Facebook, are contributing to this effort, are working on altering the HTML5 spec to take on clickjacking, which will then just make viewability measurement free for everyone because it'll be a native browser function, which ends this nonsense about browser hacks and also completely eliminates the correlation problem because everyone can call the same browser function. So then the problem just gets reduced to, well, is the browser lying or not, which is an aspect of fraud. So that'll continue to be an issue, but I'm hoping to just make viewability as a concern basically go away.
All right. Speaking as a researcher, I'll answer one specific part of your question, which is, are there things you can do without buying expensive IVT detection solutions? So yes, there are. I'll put it this way. There are a lot of unsophisticated bots that you can actually detect before you get to the really advanced ones that Michael is talking about. So because you mentioned you look at reports, you look at the analytics. As a researcher, I look for simple things like 100% click-through rates. Those are not real. But that relies on you having detailed enough data and detailed enough reports so you can see those breakout line items. The other would be 0 time on site, 100% bounce rates, or 0% bounce rates. So a good rule of thumb is that anything that's too high or anything that's too low is probably suspicious, right? So you can look for those things. And then something else that I frequently see in the data is if it's a bot and it's told to go hit a page X number of times per second or minute, you're going to see a perfectly horizontal traffic graph. And that's not normal, right? Humans visit sites during the daytime. Fewer of them visit during nighttime because they're actually sleeping. So if you see, traffic patterns that are perfectly horizontal, or ones where you see them come, so it's like a rectangular turn on of the traffic or a rectangular turn off of the traffic, those are anomalies. So again, in the analytics, there's a lot of things you can do yourself to, mitigate the most obvious fraud problems, because those still are very widespread. And once you get that low-hanging fruit done, then of course you need the tools like White Ops and the advanced detection mechanisms to then cut out the more advanced bots.
And remember, White Ops did sponsor this cocktail hour, so you might want to hire them for the very difficult.
David, can I ask you a quick question? You have DR clients, closed loop e-commerce, actually selling stuff. Why did they ask you about fraud? So they're concerned that there's fraud and they're buying fraud, even though they're making their ROI. So it's still a problem, even if it's a closed loop model. Okay, thanks.
ComScore, you want to add it? I mean, I'm only if you want to.
No, I would love to chime in. I think the question and the comments are excellent, and the viewability discussion, I think, points to maybe one of the core. Well, so I came in as a fraud detection acquisition, and I actually, at the time, I purposely stayed away from viewability measurements, and was fascinated to find when I came into ComScore 2 years ago, the number one criticism ComScore clients have of our viewability measures is that our viewability numbers are too low. So you would think that that wouldn't be an issue, but it points to an inherent, maybe a measurability problem, might point to a conflict of interest we have in our roles just generally. And we are given this power of, we have to fill our KPIs, but we also don't want to point too many problems. And so I think the best thing you can do is, you work with with any of the vendors and be very clear about what you want to achieve. And I know, as you mentioned with Moat, we'll be very clear about their results. And if you're comfortable with that, you go with that. In my presentation, I think working with a few different solutions to see what you're comfortable with is the best thing you can do, and communicate very openly with your vendor. And I applaud everything Moat has done, Integral. I think it's taken leaps and bounds forward on that. I was fascinated by Joe's question, and it does sometimes seem like a tomato fight. So you get the gloves off. It's like, so what do your clients say when they're willing to pay for something that's 30% viewable? Do you really have the conversation on that level with them, as opposed to, well, why don't we just talk about a little bit deeper what that means? So you're going to pay X CPM for something 30% viewable. Let's talk about what you're trying to achieve. So I do feel, as an industry, we sometimes get caught in a discussion that any outsider would say, you're just arguing over the pronunciation of tomato and tomato. Why don't you just get to that deeper layer and kind of agree on that? And I don't know if
maybe that's some of the metrics or the measurement discussion we had on the panel, is maybe we need to refine what it is we're buying on. Or to Joe, your point, and I was intrigued by that if it's a DR model and it's all about an outcome, then why would the brand actually care?
Because it's a topic, somebody else is asking them, and it becomes the de rigueur. It's like when, a couple of years ago, my boss is saying, "Are we in the cloud? Are we in the cloud?" It's like, do you even know what that means? Sorry, it's.
So I just want to let the audience into a little secret. That was actually number 7 on the 12-step program, was to get all the browser companies together to create a viewability measure in the browser. That's a preview of tomorrow's program if you'd like to come back for numbers 3 through 9. Meatloaf is number 6. Okay. All right. Other questions from the audience? Come on, come on up. Oh, wait a minute. We got it. Okay, say the question. I'll repeat it. And who are you? So it's the black swan question, right? Black swan planning is a method of looking at worst case scenarios and saying, what would we do if? And so the question was, if, let's just call it really extreme, 90% of ads become blocked by consumers. Think about that. 90% of all advertising comes blocked by consumers. What is your response? Who wants to take that one?
Well, we do that scenario planning, and for us, ad blocking is an issue. I mean, 20% of our telemetry goes away in some cases. So if you have a campaign verification tool and there's no need, that is a problem. We're tracking it closely. We're working with, I think, this type of dialogue to start sharing ideas. This wasn't focused specifically on ad blocking, but I'm sure Google and others, there are now startups focused specifically on helping publishers with ad blocking. With all the doom and gloom sometimes that we talk about with this, it's important that the thing I love about this industry and the whole ecosystem is we've proven time and again, every market crash we've gone through, and I think we have to admit that we are in a bit of a market crash right now within ad tech in general, right? Most VCs have closed their pocketbooks to ad tech startups. MarTech is the new hot term. It means some different things, in-house, license fees. It's not CPM driven, but we have proven that we can innovate our way out of bad situations, and I'm confident that we would do that. So I think moving to different measurements, more towards branding, more towards native is a possible solution to that. Could continue to grow. I think that's the kinds of things that we talk about. But the frank discussions we've had right now in terms of reducing the load times, making a better experience, there was no argument about that here, and I think that's great to see.
I think we have to, really plan for that scenario, 90% ad blocked. And that's because what we've built so far, with the reach and frequency mentality is not the right model. It's not the right use of digital. So TV advertisers shifting dollars into digital is using digital in kind of a mass awareness means or way. And it's not really the optimal use of digital. So the way I like to say it is the true potential of digital has not been realized. So with digital, smaller, more targeted, more precise is better. And because digital is inherently a two-way medium, you can actually see the results. So you don't need a large quantity of ads. You can achieve that in TV. And someone was mentioning the TV upfronts this year went up, right? So some of the bigger advertisers, like the CPG companies, are actually shifting dollars back to TV. So I usually call that spend polarization. So if you're an advertiser that needs awareness, still use TV. TV is great. And we've got ARF studies that prove that. If you're a performance marketer, digital is great. It's really now about finding that new equilibrium point. So for us in the digital industry, it's really about creating a new steady state, for digital. It's not what we have right now. And the consumers are actually forcing us to accelerate that change. So I think in some of the conversations we've talked about in this conference and before, so far, ad tech has been a two-party system, publisher and advertiser. Once we move to a three-party system where it's advertiser, publisher, and consumer, and we take their needs into account, we're going to arrive at a new steady state that's not what we have right now. So that could actually mean far fewer ads. It could actually mean 90% fewer ads. And we even have one published case study from AppNexus. They reduced their inventory by 92%, and the outcomes didn't change. Okay, so I think we're going to see a completely new steady state, a new form of the ecosystem that we haven't had the privilege of having so far.
So I'm sitting next to Google here, and I want to get Google's answer to the question from Harrison. What happens if 90% of ads are blocked? Since what, you guys like 60% of all ad revenue in the world?
But David, let me caveat that. Search is when the person actually says they want something. So, the search ads are highly
right.
relevant to the
So
person.
you guys could stay in the search business, but
Actually,
everything.
No. Let's assume that search is included in that. Actually, so granted, like let's say ad blockers block search because some of them do, and I think about that a lot. It's a nightmare scenario, of course, for any company that is built on advertising and making sure that their services are free to consumers. But at the same time, I almost kind of wish it did go to 90%. I almost wish it went to 100%, if only because it would wipe the slate clean. So we wouldn't have massive amounts of what I think of like maybe 2 decades worth of legacy technology that we need to work with to integrate between all the DSPs and SSPs and all of this technology that was built between what I feel like for the last two decades was a war between advertisers and publishers on saying, I don't trust you, you don't trust me, add another pixel. And so there's all this stuff, right? So 90% of ad blockers wiping all of that away, we'd have to completely rethink how we deliver services for free to consumers, and how we are able to continue pushing messages out in a way that is more responsible and more respectable to our consumers.
The response to ad blockers, they're ad blockers. So when 90% of US or worldwide internet users have an ad blocker, the vast majority of ads will be delivered to their computer anyway, unless those ad blockers can react to the ad blocker blockers, because we're not going to start with a clean slate, a piece of paper and a pencil and figure out how to advertise better. We're going to figure out how to beat the technology, because that's what we do. We live in a world of arms races, including technology arms races. So nobody really paid attention to Dr. Johnny, but what he's doing and what he's doing are enabling publishers to deliver ads to the browsers with ad blockers. So the net truth, short term, is that you're going to get ads whether you have an ad blocker or not.
So I agree. There's definitely a position now where some companies are looking to reinsert ads into the ecosystem. I don't want to get too much into like is that right or wrong? Because I think that's I think it's a very nuanced discussion. But at the same time, there are a lot of things.
Attitude towards it.
That's fair. At the same time, though, I do think that there's a lot of discussions that are happening outside of those solutions that are starting to push on a convergence of the technology to make it smoother and cleaner. So I agree with you. There are parts of the ecosystem that are moving into kind of upping the ante and increasing the war. But there are other parts that are looking at simplifying it to make it so that consumers still end up winning by the end of this.
The consumer will always win. The consumer has demonstrated in the last 2 decades that ultimately they win.
Right. And I'll bring that up again. In the same way that ad fraud will always find a way to beat our detection, ad blockers are just as quick and just as nimble, and they have just as much of a potentially economic incentive to beat out any anti-ad block that we may be creating.
Wait, no, there's a fundamental difference of type here. We can so substantially shrink the profits due to ad fraud that it becomes a less appealing crime. Whereas the arms race for ad blocking blockers, in all possible futures, is won by civil libertarian super hackers who value their time at zero and will devote their lives to winning. Right. So you have, and that's what we saw in every crypto war. Like every one of these arms races is won by the kids who will stay up all night to beat you, who are doing it for the glory, whereas the cyber criminals are actually doing it for the money. So we can crush that problem in a way that we can't with respect to ad block. Like all ad blocking arms races end with the ad blockers winning.
And I think if we get to 90%, then we've already kind of failed, right? I mean, then we didn't take any of our own advice today. Right. And our CTO would tell you that, measurement and everybody on this panel and everything we're doing leads to free press, right? Because ultimately that's what funds the ability to do that. I think that there are publishers that maybe aren't represented here today that have employed techniques like offering an ad light experience. If you arrive at their site and you have an ad blocker on, they start a dialogue with the user and they say, I notice you have an ad blocker on. Would you whitelist me in exchange? And I think there are techniques that folks are using. If we let it get to 90, then we fundamentally haven't done that between now and then. And transparency and creating a dialogue, I think, were recurring themes. I think the transparency on the ad blocking one is just as important as on the fraud one, where sunshine, cures all ills, so to speak. Particularly, in an era where a lot of folks grew up getting whatever they wanted in a customizable way. So that's what they're trying to do with their internet experiences. I work at a measurement company, and half of my team turns on ad blockers on the weekends because they want to do a certain, they want to watch, certain content without being slowed down.
So I think we could continue to do this, but I would like to be doing it over an adult beverage. So I would like everybody in this room to please give a round of applause for our panelists, for our speakers, for our experts. I want to thank everyone who traveled here for coming out. And what I'd like to do to wrap up the day is invite Gail back up to close us out with some words of wisdom, and then invite us to have a little cocktail.
They're just going to be your words. So I want to thank all the sponsors: ESPN, Distillery, Facebook, Google, Oracle Data Cloud, Twitter, Quantcast, and White Ops. And I most especially want to thank Conrad Feldman and his team for hosting us. Let's give them a round of applause. It's a really great spot. All right, so we started out the day in the jungle trying to train the elephant, right? Tame the elephant. Now I think we're going to war because we had, how to win the war, and then we've got an arms race going on, and and then we're all headed to rehab, is what I think I heard. So after you have wine at the cocktail party, then we'll dive out to rehab. And I think the first step was to admit that you have a problem, right? We had some other elements of a 12-step program. I want to thank Michael for hosting the cocktail hour and also being the first person to drop the F-bomb twice, I might add. because every good set of presentations can includes that. Usually it's earlier in the program, but you brought us home. All right, so I just have just a few wrap up comments that I want to make that I heard today. It's time to rebuild trust. It's time to rebuild trust with the consumer. It's time to rebuild trust with each other and in these kinds of events. And for my agenda and what I came to the ARF to do, it's time to rebuild trust with the next generation and for the next generation. That's what's really, really important. And so I love George's question about scenario planning around Black Swan. That's for the next generation. What are we going to do for the next generation? How are we going to make sure that we appeal to their needs and come up with solutions that will actually work for them, in addition to getting out in the sunshine, which is the other thing that I heard. As we put together different ways of simplifying what can we as an industry do under my leadership at the ARF, one of the things that I just keep coming back to is this little simple model, which is collaborate, invest, and do, and then share. And so I just encourage all of you to, use the cocktail hour to work on collaborating and build bold partnerships across with competitors, with people that everybody isn't going to like everyone, but there can be really tremendous partnerships that are created just simply in venues like this, conversationally, and the ARF is here to help you do that. The second thing is go and find some money in your organization and invest in some kind of experiment, in a startup, in something that any one of these organizations has to offer, and then go and do something and then bring it back to the industry and share. Because I came to the ARF to do two things. One is everybody was talking about all their successes and everything sounded so perfect. And I spent 32 years at General Mills and it ain't perfect. Right? I was 7 years in one division and we turned the business around twice. That actually means we turned it down and then back around. Okay, just saying. And maybe some of you have had that experience. I don't know. But when you come right down to it, until we start talking about failures and what the learning is, we are not going to be able to advance this industry. And we were starting at the end to get into, you got to break things in order to really fix them sometimes. Sometimes change is so disruptive that you have to actually create completely new kinds of solutions. And I think that's really absolutely critical. And the second reason I came to the ARF, and the thing that I'm the most proud of, is lifting up the next generation. It's investing in the young pros. Is having Jeff Buchan be our first young pro board member, creating Women in Analytics, and having the mix of members and the people on the panel represent a new level of diversity, including my staff at the ARF, and really to not just talk about these issues, but to actually demonstrate how it's done and set an example. So I want to thank all of you for being here. It's been a super fun day. Really look forward to future events. We're going to be back here in November. We have a Women in Analytics event October 13th in New York City. We'd love to have you come to that. If you have anything you want to present, you want to cook up, you want us to help invest in, like our original ground truth experiments, we're all here to do that. The ARF is here for all of you. I want to thank Mark and Kelly for coming along on the wild ride to cool San Francisco. And I want to thank Chris Bacon and everyone back at the ARF that helped facilitate this, and also especially the people that got on the webcast. So thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thank you. Michael. I was aware that. Hold on.